People of Appalachia, what's your creepiest story? 1. I have always been an avid mountain person. When people say they go to the beach for vacation, I respect it, but I prefer the mountains 100%. Something about these old giants has always fascinated me, as if I just cannot avoid but to be drawn towards them and be in awe when hiking on them. Over my short life, 21-year-old student, I consider that I have seen a fair amount of mountain ranges in Europe, from the Alps in Switzerland to the Pyrenees in Spain, and from the Italian Dolomites to the Czech Stolowe Mountains. I have always hiked and camped outdoors a lot, with family and friends, but also by myself. Now, I went to the United States for college, and I have always been tempted to do a part of the Appalachian Trail. From the pictures I saw on the internet, I always wanted to see them in person, and not gonna lie, I must say that the great amount of scary stories of these mountains always attracted me a little bit as well. I am definitely not a person who likes scary movies or anything, but I enjoy reading fellow mountaineer experiences, and to be honest, I mostly just read stories about the AT to know how to prep myself for when I was going to do it. The scary stories just got my attention every now and a while. That being said, I decided to go to this year and do a small part of the ATs. I went to do a small part between the borders of Tennessee and North Carolina, with Clingman's Dome being the icing on the cake. I was a little bit hesitant to go by myself, since I am not very familiar with both the geography as well as the wildlife in this part of the States. I wanted to go with a friend or my girlfriend who is from North Carolina herself, but both my friend from Germany. As my girlfriend declined because they had to work, I had spring break. So I decided I just had to go by myself, since I am graduating this year and will return back to Europe. I started at this place called Bryson City and walked along the Tuckasegee River until I reached the Nolan Creek trailhead. From there on, I just followed the trail until I would reach Clingman's Dome, and from Clingman's Dome I would follow the AT for about a week. I had prepared well for this trip. I carried bear spray and pepper spray. I read some freaky stories about people in the AT, and I also brought this hunting knife and axe for wood. I had some canned food and lots of water, plus water filter, and for the rest, just my tent and sleeping bag. So when I started walking away from Bryson City, and I saw the beautiful aura this mountain range had, I couldn't be happier. I had been wanting to do this since I had arrived here in the US, and I was finally doing it. I encountered some people on the Nolan Creek trailhead who were friendly, but I had made up my mind that I would be better off alone than with strangers. I reached Clingman's Dome the same day, and went a little further before I would set camp. It was beautiful. At night I slept a bit off the trail, with a small campfire while I had dinner, in which I put out before I went to sleep. The first night went super well, as I also was exhausted from the hike to Clingman's Dome. The next 2 days were just as beautiful, and I saw lots of breathtaking views. The people on the AT I encountered were super polite as well. Then, at the third night, I feel like everything took a strange turn. I had set up my camp just as usual, around 160 feet from the trail. No one was camping close to me, or at least not that I was aware of. While getting dinner, I just had this super weird gut feeling that I was not alone there. I felt like as if someone was looking at me from behind a tree or something like that. I tried to just convince myself that I was having an amazing time, that I was safe, and that it was just my mind playing tricks on me. I went to sleep and put out the fire as usual. Then, before it was daylight again, I woke up. I woke up with this same gut feeling that, even though I was in my tent, someone was watching my tent from a distance. I did not hear a single bird, which was weird because right before daylight is when they start chirping again. I only heard the wind and the leaves. It made me feel uncomfortable, a bit scared even. I didn't fall asleep again, and first thing in the morning, after having breakfast in my tent, I broke up camp and decided to continue my hike. During my hike, I encountered a few people, and again they were very nice. But I stick to myself. While walking on this part of the trail by myself alone, I felt being observed again. I even had the feeling as if something or someone was following me. So every now and then, I would stop dead in my tracks in order to hear if it was real. Now, obviously my mind could be playing tricks, but I would swear that I heard the steps stop a second after I had stopped. So according to me at that moment, someone was following me. I looked around me the whole time, and I never saw someone or something, which made it even more weird. After the long day of hiking, I made camp, this time closer to the trail than usual, because for some reason I thought it would be more safe. I again had this gut feeling of being watched while having dinner outside my tent. So I decided to finish it up in my tent, and I went to the bathroom in a bottle, because I did not want to go outside now. I tried to sleep by closing my eyes, but my mind just focused on hearing the whole time. And that is when I heard it for the first time. A knock, as if a branch was hitting a tree, or a small rock was getting thrown at a tree. Silence followed, for what seemed an eternity, but probably only 10 minutes. Then again, this time more clear. I was scared now and had no idea where to go, since it was dark already. I put on my flashlight in the tent and made myself as big as I could so that my shadow outside the tent would look bigger because of the light. I don't know why this was my reasoning at the time, I just thought of bears. And I held my hunting knife in my hand. The silence had followed the second knock. But now I shouted to pierce the silence in the dark. First I shouted that whoever was joking around, I was armed, and I was not wanting to be pranked. I thought this would scare them off. It didn't. It was almost as if this person found it even more funny knowing I was pissed at them. I heard another knock, and immediately after a knock on what I assumed to be the opposite side from my tent. So now I was guessing it was 2 people instead of 1, and that they liked to pull a prank on an innocent passerby. I tried to stay up as long as I could, but around 4 a.m. my eyes just gave up and I dwelled off. I woke up around 8 a.m. again, with the light of the sun being my savior. I first tried to hear if whoever was pranking me was still knocking. I did not hear anything. I shouted again, stating that I was now going to exit my tent with my knife in my hand, and that whoever had been joking around should make themselves known. I walked out of my tent, and I did not see anyone. I looked for tracks around my camp, but could not immediately make something out of it. I decided to get the hell out of there. The next part of my week basically continued being the same. At night, I'd hear some knocks from different directions, and occasionally, I heard what I would guess was a little bit of humming, like as if a person was just humming a tune. Now, I never saw anyone except from the occasional hikers on the AT, so I cannot say I saw something weird. But I never shook of this weird gut feeling of being observed and followed during the rest of my hike on the AT. I am now back and commented this to my girlfriend. She says it was probably my mind playing tricks on me, and I am willing to believe her, because I never saw anything. But I still sometimes wake up in the middle of the night thinking I am in that tent in the middle of nowhere, and someone is watching me and knocking on a tree. And every time I wake up like this, the thought alone scares me, too. Okay, so first off, these stories are 100% true. Most were told by family and friends through the years, along with some of my own encounters in the rural mountains and ridgelines of my county, of course. As with all creepy stories, to give you a good scare, take them with a grain of salt, however. I must still say that these stories are as real as me sitting here writing this up. I hope you all find these as interesting as I do. Background. I have grown up in eastern Kentucky for several years since the age 1. My family, both sides, have grown up in the rural Appalachians, their whole lives as well, but as with modern times moved to the small town nestled here in a valley, situated in between rolling hills and deep ridgelines. Where the following stories take place is a rural area nestled deep in the Appalachian Mountains. It's got a name and it's considered a county. However, the area where my dad's family grew up in within this area, and where these stories come from, is more like a collection of deep ridges and mountain folks than anything else, just to clear up any confusion that this isn't an actual town. During the early days of the settlers, these mountains were home to the Cherokee Indians. Many cemeteries in this area has actually around 30 to 40 graves of Native Americans buried there, marked with stones and rocks rather than a more traditional Indian burial routine in the 1800s. George Washington's aide-de-camp colonel. Story number 1. In the 1970s or 80s, my mom and her aunt, along with her small cousins, were driving in an empty road just outside of town when they created the top of a hill where an abandoned farmhouse stood. They stopped their car in its tracks when they saw a massive hovering saucer-shaped craft hovering over the house. Frightened, my mother and her aunt booked it out of there at a high rate of speed. Scared, they continued down the mountain back to town quickly, however. When they looked in the rearview mirror, they saw the craft coming after them at a high rate of speed, tailing the car and keeping up with it. They attempted multiple times to evade the craft, but to no avail. It chased them for over a mile, back to town, until finally just at the edge of the county road that leads back into town, it finally disappeared. My mother has told this story at least 100 times to family and friends, most of which believe her, as they too have seen strange lights in the sky in and around various areas of the community, though some don't. She drew me a picture of the spacecraft a few years ago, which I still have. It's gray and almost metallic looking by the way she drew it. It has red lights on all edges of the bottom of the craft, along with a few green lights on the sides of it. If anyone wants to see the sketch, I will happily oblige. Story number 2. When my mother was a child, old enough to know when something is going on, was at home with her parents and siblings one night, a man whom her mother and family already knew and were acquainted with barged into the house scared out of his wits. He lived in a cabin deep within the woods some miles away. During his stay there, he reported poltergeist activity, orbs, and paranormal activity within the property and house itself. He would go on to tell my grandmother that reportedly he was tormented all night by a demon who, threw pots and pans, glasses, and even furniture at him. This went on for almost the entire night. It would throw them completely out of the cabinets, almost hitting him with it. It also reportedly started knocking and tapping on the sides of the house and thumping the walls and ceiling. Finally, he mustered up the nerves to utter the Lord's Prayer and attempt to rebuke it in the name of Jesus Christ. This seemed to piss it off even more, and causing it to become even more aggressive, and now would try to kill him with more heavier objects. He ran from the house and spent around 7 to 8 hours walking through the woods and rural country roads back to my grandmother's house. While on his way to the house, he reported that he could hear footsteps trailing him in the woods and next to the road, but he couldn't see anything. It continued this for several hours, until he finally reached the Reese house. Story number 3. In the 90s in town sat a white brick house at the top of a small hill. A man and his wife lived for several years. The man was in his 40s or 50s and the woman somewhere around the same age, I believe. Anyways, one day while my mother was working at a local gas station where the woman also coincidentally worked at, the man had called her saying that something was wrong with the gas in the basement. He went downstairs and laid on his back and crawled up under the thing to see what had happened. He lit a match and immediately the house exploded, sending rubble everywhere and a massive fire hall and smoke that could be seen throughout town. The man's wife, who saw the explosion from the gas station, ran home to discover the house. The man's body, as one might expect in a situation like this, was blown into pieces with body parts even littering some neighboring houses. Since then it has become a local legend that the man's spirit haunts the house that was built on the land where the original one stood. The show Ghost Hunters, or maybe another ghost hunting TV series, actually filmed an episode here because of the experiences by the home's inhabitants. Everything from pots and pans rattling and stuff being thrown around to actual manifestations inside the residence. 3. So this happened last year in Virginia, and is also the reason I never backpack alone anymore. I was taking summer courses at the time, and we ended up with a 3-day weekend in June, so I thought it was a great time to go explore some of the Virginian wilderness. I did a Google search, found a state park with a trail that looked nice, and let my roommate and family know the trail I was going to be on. When I got close to the park area, I saw a little outdoor shop where people hiking the Appalachian Trail stop. I went in to grab a map of the area just in case I got lost. As I was talking to the owner, he mentioned a trail that's not well known that has a pretty cool waterfall and swimming hole. This piqued my interest, so I had him show me on the map. It took me outside the state park, but he said it was a great place to go. I paid for the map and thanked the owner. I texted my roommate and parents about the new trail, and I parked my car and set off on my adventure. I should note that the waterfall was going to be a side trip from my journey. I was planning 3 days, 2 nights. I started on part of the Appalachian Trail, and it was pretty packed with people, and some of them were really fun to talk to. As expected, as I got further and further from the main trails, I saw less and less people. Around early afternoon, 3 miles from my destination, I noticed it was unnaturally silent. No birds, no bugs, not even wind. And I had a feeling of being watched. I shook it off as me over-analyzing the situation. I got to the waterfall, and it wasn't too spectacular, but it was cool to look at. Plus, it had a good size area to swim in, so naturally I stripped down to my skivvies and took it dip. It was pretty refreshing. As I was getting my clothes back on, I started whistling to myself. It was Chill Bill because it was stuck in my head. That's when I heard something whistle the same tune back. I thought it was a bird copying me, so I went back and forth with it, and it'll repeat whatever I whistled. I thought IR was pretty neat. As I was setting up camp, one couldn't shake this feeling that I was being watched again, like I'd get goosebumps and my hairs would stand up. As night fell, I built a small fire and lit my jet boil to make dinner. As I did this, I became hyper-aware that again, there was no sound, just deafening silence. Some part of my brain was telling me that I'm not safe and to leave. I ignored it and crawled into my tent with my flashlight and book. I went to sleep without incident. When I woke up the next morning, my site was trashed. My camp stool was nowhere to be found. My bear bag with my food was cut down, and the contents were thrown across the site. My first thought was a crafty animal chewed through the rope and got at the bag. But I looked at the rope, and it was cut with something very sharp. Plus, none of the food was even touched. I also noticed bare footprints all around my campsite. Keep in mind, I'm at least 6 to 8 miles from a road. As I was looking at the mess, I heard a branch snap off in the distance. I turned to look in that direction. I saw nothing, but I heard that whistling again. My whistle from yesterday. But it was different. It sounded more sinister. It made my hair stand on end, and this is when I listened to my instincts to get the hell out. It sounded like it was a little off in the distance, so I packed up my camp as fast as I could. The whistling got closer as I finished stuffing the tent into my bag. I didn't bother with putting anything away properly. The whistling was incessant and sounded like it was coming for all directions. I got fed up with the whistling stood and I yelled into the woods, "Shut up, and what the fuck do you want?" It stopped whistling, and it was quiet for a moment. Then it repeated what I said in my voice. It sounded just like me, but distorted, like it came from an old TV. After I heard this, I immediately threw my pack on and ran the direction I came. I heard it moving just behind me, fast switching between the whistle and my voice. It felt like it was toying with me, not coming too close, but not being too far. Eventually, it sounded like it got further and further away from me. Then it stopped suddenly. When it stopped, I stopped and turned around. I wished I didn't, because I heard the most bone-chilling screech ever coming from right next to me. That's when I started running again. I didn't look, I only ran. Less than a half mile, I ran into a couple that was also backpacking. They saw the look of terror in my face and asked if that was me that screamed, and asked if I was okay. I told them about what happened, and they decided to not go down where I just came from. We moved to a more populated trail, and as quickly as we could. As soon as I got back in my car, I drove to one of the park's ranger stations and reported what happened. Since the site was off park grounds, they told me it wasn't in their jurisdiction, but they'll send a ranger to investigate. The ranger station's parking lot run right up to the woods, and when I was getting into my Jeep, I heard the Chill Bill tune coming from woods just in front of me. I never drove so fast in my life. When told my roommate why I was back after only one night, all he said was, "Bro, I'm never going camping with you." 4. This was the most terrifying moment of my life, always will be. My family and a friend's family were going on a hiking trip to the Appalachian Mountains. We had rented cabins at a camping site and had arranged certain paths to follow each day of our trip, 4 days long, that we would walk each day. The first 3 days went great. We saw wildlife, had a good time, and talked a lot. But on the 4th day, we were taking a trail that was more secluded and overgrown than the others. We were walking for about 30 minutes when I was hit with this overwhelming feeling of uneasiness. The feeling just stayed there no matter how hard I tried to beat it back. Then, and everyone else on the hike denies this, I hear singing, in a language that I've never heard before. It's like the singing described in the myth of the sirens, sweet and enchanting, yet the music invoked a feeling of fear, down to my bones. Everyone else seems completely oblivious to it. I tried telling my dad that something was wrong, but he just told me I was probably tired and that we would stop soon. So about 5 minutes later, and the singing just keeps getting louder, and my heart was racing. We had stopped to rest and eat something as well. I wish with all my heart that we hadn't stopped. About 2 minutes into our little rest, the singing is still getting progressively loud, but my nerves have settled slightly. Then, everything falls silent. Everyone in our group, about 12 people, suddenly turns to the trees to our left. A figure, tall and in a black cloak, was barely visible between the trees. It was a woman, much taller than normal people are, with pure white hair flowing out of her hood. Her head is down, but her face is still slightly visible. All I can make out is that her skin is very pale yellow, like old paper. As we watch, she just stalks closer to our group, finally stopping right at the edge of the trees. She looks up, and I swear to God, as long as I live and breathe, I will never forget her face. Her eyes are completely white, with no pupils or irises visible. She had a thin, pointed nose, and had a mouth with lips that were stained red. I don't want to know why. She stares at us for a moment, and then smiles. It was horrifying. She had no teeth, and her eyes began to shine. She then begins to talk. She had a horrible, scratchy, high-pitched voice, and said, "Leave this place while you still can. I'll be watching you. Don't try anything." I blink, and she's gone. Everyone is silent. This is my first time telling this story to anyone else who didn't experience this with me. And I never discuss it with anyone who did experience this with me. It feels good to share this experience with someone. People who have encountered a skinwalker. What's your story? 1. I have one. I'm Native American and met my ex-girlfriend at a all-Native American boarding school after I graduated. I went back to res for a few weeks, got into some trouble, and ended up the hospital. My GF at the time heard what happened and traveled a few from her to get me, so I ended up staying with her. But things didn't work after a year, my last night there, before I had to head back to my res. I was sleeping in the living room and my ex was in her room because we were broken up at that time. I had been watching TV about to doze off when I hear 2 ladies talking in Navajo outside. So I assume it's my ex's mom coming back from the casino. So I just wait for someone to open the door. Eventually the 2 ladies stop talking and I go ask my ex if her mom had come back in, and she tells her mom is still at the casino. But I tell her I hear 2 ladies outside on the porch talking to each other. So I finally head to the front porch and turn on the lights, and there is nobody out there. I step outside and walk toward the cars, and I see these 2 coyotes up and book it back toward the highway. I went back into and told my ex. She gets up and tells her dad. He gets up and gets in his truck and drives around the house a few times. He eventually tells me they were mostly like skinwalkers, My ex's mom had problems with a few ladies there on their res, as it might have to with that. So yeah, I heard two coyotes talking in Navajo to each other on my ex's porch. 2. Alright, so a friend and I used to go out almost every weekend to look for anything skinwalker related. We wanted to be hunters of the topic, so we hear stories. Found locations, walked 5+ miles around my housing area. Eventually something was bound to follow us home. One night, after calling it short, we came back to my parents' house to relax for the night and play some video games. 11 p.m. to 12 a.m. We hear strange noises outside my bedroom window. My older sister room is next to mine, so our windows were about 2 feet apart. We turn down the volume on the TV and hear a faint rattling with two voices chanting something in Navajo. Deep fried voices chanting. I look at my friend not saying a word. I whisper to him to grab the paintball gun. We didn't have actual guns in the house. We slowly make our way to the living room to the front door. I look at my friend and say, on 3, we go out and shoot whatever is at the window. He nods in agreement. On 3, we burst out the door, and when we turn right to the window, two canine-looking beings run away from the house and behind the truck parked outside. When we run around to look for them, they were gone. No tracks to follow. We look at the window outside, and it has some soft dirt, and we look for footprints. And what we found was, they weren't outside my window but my sister's, based on the disturbed dirt right below her window. They were chanting outside her window, and at the time she was pregnant with her first child. We went inside and woke them up to tell them. They're very traditional, and her BF was too, so they called her BF's dad, and the next day he came out and did a prayer on them and the house. I was told not to be doing that stuff, and that I was being stupid for inviting the skinwalkers to my parents' house, even though I didn't do it on purpose. Needless to say, that didn't stop us, but we did take extra precautions when going out. I have more, and my aunt has told me a few, and believe me, what she experienced growing up makes this story seem like nothing. 3. I posted this story a few years back. I still vividly remember this, even now. Hopefully what you're looking for. 26M, living in South Korea while in the Army. I grew up in Southern California, and my parents took me and my brother camping constantly, in Mammoth Mountain, Grand Canyon, etc. I'm really unfamiliar with this type of stuff, but I saw a haunting video of a clearly corpse-like person screaming help in the woods, and it threw me through the ringer, as it triggered a memory I had when I was probably around 8 or so, and was camping in Big Bear. We were on a very domesticated camping site. Lights, hard site latrines, water, no one could have possibly been lost there. I woke up around what would have had to be 0200 to someone wailing and moaning in the night. It still gives me the worst shakes and goosebumps, just remembering it now. It was so terrifying I couldn't even move. I was in the tent with both my folks and my brother. I can't remember if I asked them the following day or not about it. Of course it could have been a fever dream, but I remember it so vividly and being absolutely terrorized. I know that I was awake. Don't think I could have made that up as an 8Y/O. I woke up purely because of it was so loud and terrifying. For about an hour I heard it wailing for help over and over again, in a low pitch, then raised pitch. It clearly was not a call for help due to pain or fear. It was wailing, but emotionless statements for help. Help! Help! There were maybe 3 to 5 second pauses before it repeated. It never said anything but help in this pattern for over an hour. It never explained why they needed help. It never even seemed frustrated that literally no one in this entire campsite was even calling out to it. It's tough to remember, but the voice sounded like it must have been a teenage boy. Our campsite was the furthest in on a small cliff with a river below it that you could scale down to. There wasn't anything but woods behind the campsite, so I feel like that's at Toss where it must have been traveling through, which makes more sense why no one else in the campsite responded, or may have even heard it, other than our tent. I remember it never came extremely close to my tent, but its movement was obvious from the direction and volume of its voice changing. It traveled some distance, as it never stopped until it faded out, and must have moved out of earshot. In the AM, I'm texting my folks to find out exactly what campsite it was at, to follow up with a better location for y'all and my brother to see if he remembers as well. Edit. Big Basin CA, Semper Virens was the exact campsite this happened at. I tried to look up and see if there were other similar events, but nothing that I could find. 4. I was out one night trying to catch catfish at Lake Monroe in Indiana. It was about 3 or 4 in the morning, and I'd been fishing with absolutely no luck for over an hour. I was talking to my GF on the phone. Our connection wasn't great because Lake Monroe is way out in the forest where you're lucky to have a signal at all. I was doing a bait check when I suddenly had a weird gut feeling. I got quiet and realized that it was dead silent under the bridge where I was fishing. No crickets chirping, no frogs croaking, nothing. Just the small waves crashing and the branches being blown by the wind. I sat silent for a minute. My GF thought she'd lost me again, but I told her no, and that I was leaving to go back home because something was wrong. I packed my gear as fast as possible and jumped into my car. I was flying out of there. As I got over the bridge, I started to pass this field. That's when I saw what I believe was a skinwalker. It was like time slowed as I drove by. I couldn't take my eyes off of it. It had brown fur, like a deer, but it was missing patches all over its body. It was huge too. At the shoulder, it had to be at a minimum 5 feet 9. Its face looked like a dog's almost, and it had blood all over its face and head. It reminded me of when a deer sheds its antlers. It watched as I drove by moving to maintain eye contact. Its body was gross. Like I said, brown patchy fur, but its arms, legs, and stomach were all very skinny, like it was starving. I believe that if I'd stopped and/or stayed fishing, I wouldn't be alive to tell this story, and I hope I never see something like that again. I love horror and don't scare easily, but this thing was horrifying. 5. I'm still kinda shooken up from what happened, but I don't think it's coming back. Okay, so basically about a week ago, I can't really remember the day, but I was staying at my friend's house for the night, number 1, and we had a few girls chilling with us, and me and my friend decided to walk them home, but to get there you have to walk through a dark path that leads to the gas station and the main road. The path is surrounding a dried up lakes, and there are a fuck ton of coyotes and other animals around here, so me and my other friend, number 2, leave the house and start walking with these girls now. The walk over there wasn't too bad, and number 2 had sharp bush cutters in his waistband. As we walk there, we say our goodbyes and whatnot, and they walk off into the distance and make it home safe. That's when me and number 2 start to make our way back to number 1's house when we stop, and for some reason we thought to throw rocks at a kid's window, so we do it and walk off when we hear a loud scream and start running. And we make it to a trail that leads to the dried up lake and we walk. But we can subtly hear footsteps, and we look back and see approximately 10 people following us, and keep in mind we are living in a place where gangs walk around, so we thought they were trying to get us, but we keep walking. About 3 minutes later, I see only 3 people and get suspicious, so I call number 1, and this is how it goes. Me, yo, I think people are following us, come over here. Number 1, 8, I'm on my way, be careful. And we see number 1 and run up to him, and we walk on the dried lake path right next to his house. This is where it gets fucking horrifying. We stare back and we see one dude walking toward us, and he stops in his tracks and shifts to staring directly at us. And I heard number 2 say, "Is he levitating?" And he starts floating, and the scary thing is we all saw different beings, keep this in mind. But we are convinced of a skinwalker, because when he started floating, he shapeshifted. For me, I saw a figure with a box head and super long arms and legs. Number 1 saw a slender, tall person with tentacles, and number 2 saw him change into shapes and colors. Regardless, we were gone, and we ran to the house petrified with what we saw, and we were talking for a few minutes, but then we see it. Number 1's cat ran past. But there's a catch. Number 1's cat had been missing for weeks, and all the doors were shut. So we look at him for a minute, and the cat's eyes had no pupils, and it was staring straight at us, and we ran and barricaded number 1's door. And the cat scratched at the door for hours, and we heard sounds all night, but we thought it was Foley at Duex. Madness of 2. But no, it's not that. At sunrise, we all went out to the lake, and turns out not only did we see different things, we saw them all in different places. Also no, me and number 2 are Native American, so we knew something was going down. This morning I whistled, and I heard a whistle back. I was with number 2 at the time. That's the end for now. 6. Growing up in Arizona, myths and legends are a part of life. Native traditions, mystic places, vortexes, UFO abductions, and dozens of other stories of the unknown that I always found fascinating. I grew up spending a lot of time wandering around the desert and the mountains, hunting, camping, etc., so I felt very at home in the wilderness. One late spring day on one of my many hiking adventures, I wandered off trail, and after several hours came upon a small group of old mud adobe houses. A few people heard me coming and came out of the houses to investigate, and after apparently making the collective decision that I was not a threat, one of the elders dressed in old-style traditional native clothing and a headdress came over to greet me. The man spoke slowly and told me that I had wandered onto a Navajo reservation and asked me if I was lost, or if I needed help. When I told him no, I was lost, but intentionally, he chuckled and invited me in to eat with his family. The next several hours were one of the great experiences of my life. The whole thing was like being thrown back in time. While we ate and talked, others from the surrounding houses began coming over to join us, and I got the feeling they didn't get many outside visitors. We shared stories for hours about life, family, theater history in the area, and time spent in the wild. And the longer we talked, The more they opened up and the more interesting the elders' stories got. Throughout the time, there was one man who never spoke. He just sat out of the circle listening and watching me. At one point, I told them I did what I called my walkabouts every year around September, where I would go out by myself into the wilderness for 2 to 4 weeks at a time. And this got the attention of the one silent old man. When I finished, he came over to the circle around the fire, sat directly on the ground in front of me, and asked me to join him on the ground. He told me that years ago he used to do the same thing, and went on to tell me about the canyon he went to. He described it as a dangerous but magic place, and that I would see the world differently if I came back. Must be for dramatic effect. When he finished, he invited me over to his home. The house was small, and through an open door in the back room, I could see it was filled with various animal pelts, coyotes, and wolves mostly. He walked over and closed that door, then picked up and handed me an old map and some written directions that seemed like he had been holding on to them for a long time, and just walked away into that back room and closed the door behind him. It was late, and one of the families had invited me to stay the night, which I gladly did. The next morning, as I prepared to leave, one of the old women came over to me with something in her hands, handed me a talisman, and simply said, "Dip your bullets in the white ash at the hottest part of the fire," then just walked away. September came, and as I packed for my walkabout, I saw the talisman in a drawer and something felt right about taking it with me. After a beautiful drive, I was very happy to find the Forest Service road marked on the old map. The entrance to the area was remote and overgrown, and tough to get to even in my Jeep, and took me much longer to get to than expected. So I decided to make camp and start the hike in the morning. After a few hours on a trail that looked like it had been forgotten, I came to a stream and the entrance to the secret valley. It was a narrow crack in the tall cliffs with about 4 feet of water running gently through, but too narrow for a kayak or canoe. I hoisted my gear over my head and began the wade sideways through the chest-deep water. The crack in the cliffs seemed to go on forever, but after almost 2 hours I came to the place where it opened up into a small lake in an incredible valley surrounded by tall rock faces. This may have been the most remote place I have ever been, in the sense that there was no sign that people had ever been there. No trash, no bullet casings, not even the evidence of campfires. My first night there was the quietest night I have ever spent in the wild. No birds, no frogs, not even crickets. But I didn't feel like I was alone there. In the morning, after breakfast, I headed out on my first exploratory hike to explore my new home for the next couple weeks. After being stalked by a mountain lion on a hike about 10 years ago, I make a point of now bringing a pistol with me when I'm out wilderness hiking. After some looking around, I found a narrow path that appeared to be a game trail that led up the side of one of the cliffs and towards what looked like caves from the canyon floor. I made my way up to them and came upon an entrance that was much larger than it appeared from below. I made some noise to alert any possible animals I was there and made my way inside. The cave was an expansive single chamber that went back a couple hundred feet. As I walked, I inspected as much as I could see with my light, but there was no tracks of any kind in the dirt besides mine, so I decided I was alone in there, and pushed on towards the rear of the cave. As I came around the last bend in the cave and approached the end, my headlamp panned across a large pile of bones, some animal, some human, and a very old-looking small candle sitting on a natural stone shelf. This is the first thing that has scared me in as long as I can remember. But focusing my wits, I remembered that there was no other tracks in the cave and figured it was all from a long time ago. I was still a little uneasy as I exited the cave and was ready to get back to camp. As I came out into the light, about 75 feet away, there was the largest wolf I have ever seen that looked like it was coming down from standing on its hind legs. It dropped down to all fours on a rock, just began staring at me, not growling or baring its teeth, just staring. I pulled my .45 and fired 2 shots to the side of it to scare it away, but it didn't even flinch. Not only have I never seen a wolf in this part of northern Arizona, but I have never seen a wild animal that did not at least flinch at the sound of a gunshot. We both stood there staring at each other for a moment. I turned and set my backpack down to grab my binoculars and get a little closer look, but when I turned back, the wolf was gone. I made my way cautiously down the path back towards camp. I have encountered wolves before, and usually it's not the one wolf you can see that should worry you, it's the ones you can't see, so I was extra cautious for the return trip. Back at camp, I made sure my gun was fully loaded and got my recurve bow strung just in case the wolves came back. I have seen plenty of predatory animals on my adventures. It's a part of being in the wilderness, so I wasn't too worried. Just prepared myself the best I could and went over to the lake to go fishing. Within about 20 minutes, I caught 2 of the biggest brown trout I've ever caught, so I decided to stop fishing for the day and take a swim. Back at camp, I made a fire, cleaned my trout, and made dinner while the sun went down. As soon as the sun went down, All of the life in the canyon seemed to go silent again. As I put out my fire and prepared for bed, I noticed there was a small flicker of light coming from the area where the cave I had explored earlier up the cliffside, which didn't make sense. It was a moonless night, and stars don't reflect that way. It couldn't have been the candle I had seen. It was too old and would not have burned so bright. I decided to keep my gun close and try to get some sleep. I would investigate the cave again the next day. When I woke at sunrise, there was a haze along the ground throughout the whole canyon floor. But as the sun rose, it disappeared quickly, and the area came back to life. I made my breakfast, gathered my gun and bow, and headed back up towards the cave. When I reached the entrance, I saw there were still no tracks besides mine around the entrance, and decided to push up the hill further. Just a little further up, I came upon the entrance to another cave, much smaller than the first one. There was a small flat landing with a large, heavily twisted juniper tree that, to my absolute surprise, had many small objects hanging from thin, old-looking ropes tied to the branches. There were bones, but there were also old things, definitely made by humans, and looked like they were old Native American artifacts. Thinking I might have found the spot where the old man I met on the reservation had stayed when he was there decades ago, I went into the cave. This cave was much different from the first one. Just a few feet in, I noticed the walls were covered in what looked like ceremonial cave paintings. As I pushed further back, the cave got dramatically colder, much colder than it should have been, and the walls were completely covered with the paintings the entire way. When I reached the back of the cave, I was not prepared for what I saw. There was what looked like an old altar made of wood and bones. As I looked around, I saw that a little before the back of the cave, there was another shaft in the ceiling that went up, and on a ledge about 25 feet up sat the small figure of what appeared to be a woman. She was small and pale with her face painted white, and wearing something like a crown made of woven branches with two small antlers at the front. I stopped and stared for a few minutes, and the figure did not move, so I assumed that it was mummified remains from a long time ago. Not wanting to disturb a burial site, I turned to walk back out of the cave, but I began to walk. I heard what sounded like a faint voice in an unknown, ancient language. I instinctively looked back up towards the figure, but it was gone. I was immediately terrified and ran from the cave as fast as I could get out, but my headlamp flickered and died. I made my way out, feeling along the wall to find my way, and the whole way I felt like there was something right behind me. When I saw the first light from the cave entrance, I began to sprint towards it. Just before I made it out, I looked back and there was nothing, so I slowed down. But I could still hear the faint voice, and the volume never changed. When I got outside, all the bones and artifacts hanging from the tree were gone. I ran down the path as fast as I could, headed back to my campsite by the lake. Just as I reached the floor of the canyon, I noticed the large wolf at the tree line to my left, but this time it stayed standing upright on its hind legs. I stopped running, hoping to not initiate its predatory response to chase me, and again, it just stood there staring at me. I reached my campsite safely and immediately began packing up. It was too late in the day to make it out before dark, and I did not want to make the hike out at night with all that was going on. I moved my tent so it would back up to the canyon wall by the crack in the cliffside, so I didn't have to worry about anything sneaking up behind me. I built my fire much larger and knew I wasn't going to get any sleep that night. Just as the sun was going down, I began to hear noises coming from the trees, and I felt like I was being hunted. Finally, in the last light of day, I saw the wolf slowly walking around by where the path led out of the trees, and it began to slowly walk towards me. This time I drew my gun and fired towards the creature, intending to hit it, and while I saw a couple hit the dirt around it, several bullets hit it. Several rounds from .45 will at least slow down anything I've ever encountered. But this giant wolf kept walking towards me like nothing had happened. I continued to fire at it until the inevitable click of an empty magazine. I reached down and fumbled around in my backpack looking for my other magazines to reload, and as I lifted it, the talisman the old woman gave me fell out onto the ground. I picked it up and put it around my neck, and immediately remembered what she had told me. Dip your bullets in the white ash. I looked around but didn't see my backup magazines, so I grabbed my bow, pulled an arrow that was tipped with a hunting broadhead, and dipped it into the white ashes, drew and fired. I hit the creature just in front of its right hip, and it let out a noise somewhere between a growl and a person screaming that made my blood curdle. I can hear that noise in my head to this day. It immediately turned and ran back to the trees, and in the flicker of the firelight I saw the small woman with the antler crown standing there waiting for it. They both retreated into the trees, and for the rest of the night, I could hear the same faint voice I had heard in the cave. I spent the night outside of my tent, as awake as I have ever been, but no longer afraid, and at dawn finished packing up so I could get out of that canyon. The next spring, I went back to the small group of houses on the Navajo reservation I had found the year before. I was wearing the talisman as a necklace, and the first person to greet me was the woman who had given it to me, and she ran up to give me a big hug. "You heard me," was all Shay said. I asked the group about the man who had given me the map, as I was almost desperate to talk to him about the experience I had so I could compare it to his own. They told me that he had disappeared shortly after I had visited them the first time and had not been back. Strangely, when I tried to tell them what had happened to me, no one would let me tell the story. And the oldest man there who sat in the corner kept mumbling the words, "Yi, Nald Lushi." We all once again sat and shared other stories of life and a meal. Before I left the next morning, I found the old woman who had given me the talisman and offered it back to her. She smiled and told me I had a good heart, then just closed my hands around it, telling me to keep it to watch over my next walkabout. I went back to that small village on the reservation several times over the next 10 years or so till I moved to Oregon, but they never let me tell them what happened. I never went back to the canyon, and while curiosity sometimes gets the best of me, I don't think I ever will.
About a year ago, I moved my family and I to a home way out in the woods in Tennessee. I wanted to be brief here, but I need to get this off my chest. And after looking into this matter a little more, I have a lot more details that I think will paint a clear picture in the end. So please bear with me. The nights here can be extremely loud. Between the crickets, the tree frogs, and the cicadas, it can almost be deafening. One night, not too long after we moved in, I had forgotten something in my car and headed outside to get it. The first thing that struck me as odd was that my dog wouldn't go outside with me. My dog goes everywhere with me, as I am her whole world. But not this night. As I held the door open, she looked out, then looked up at me like, nope. So I walked out and shut the door behind me. The second thing that caught me off guard was that there was not a peep. It was dead silent. Still shrugged this off and walked down my front steps and headed down to my car. When I had gotten about 10 feet from my car, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I felt as though something was watching me. I looked around but saw nothing. After I reached in my car for what I had forgotten to grab earlier, I had this feeling like something was moving towards me. I took a step back and checked around me. All of a sudden, I heard one of my hedges next to me that lined the walkway to our front door rattle. At first, I thought it was a rabbit that I had spooked, as I had seen one just earlier in the day right where this was. A few seconds later, I heard the sound of a large rock, about the size of a cantaloupe, landing a few feet away from me. It hit the walkway and bounced into a shrub. I drew my gun and called out and said, "Whoever this was is about to be shot." After a few seconds of nothing, I began to think that maybe this was some local teenagers messing with the new people. I holstered my sidearm, turned, and started walking back to my front door. Almost as soon as I turned towards my house, I heard this deep panting sound. It sounded like a huge dog, but what made me nope back to my front door was that it sounded like it was right behind me. I leaped up onto my porch, turned, and drew my gun again, expecting something right there. But again, there was nothing. A couple weeks later, I was on my porch at night, sitting on a bench with my wife. She got up and walked inside to get something, and as soon as she shut the door, I heard that panting sound again. I couldn't see anything, yet this sounded like it was right on top of me. The sound was coming from everywhere, and it was very loud. Again, I couldn't see anything, so I noped it back inside my house. Now at this point, I was questioning moving here, but after nothing else really happening, I let it go. A month or so later, it was a really rainy and stormy night. This is around 9 p.m., and my wife and I enjoy listening to the rain and talking about how relaxing the rain is. Me growing up in Oregon loved the rain, and for the past 10 years we lived in Vegas, where it would dump the entire year of rain in a day, then be bone dry for the rest of the year. For my wife, who grew up in Nevada, rain was such a rare thing. She loved going outside and watching the rain. So for us, this is an enjoyable experience. Except this night in particular, things took a weird turn. As we were sitting there talking about the rain and relaxing, my wife stops me and said, "Did you hear that?" I said, "No, what did you hear?" She said, "I swear it sounded like a small child calling for help out in the woods beside our house." I said, "No, I didn't hear anything." After a few moments of us listening intently, she said, "There it is again." I said, "I didn't hear a thing, sweetie. Are you sure you're not just hearing things?" She looked at me, offended that I didn't hear anything, and said, "No, I am positive. How could you not hear that? It was our son. I think he's out there and got lost." I said, "No, he's in the house sleeping on the couch." We then both looked through the blinds that were open right behind us, and we could see all of our children laying there. She said, "That's so weird. I swear it sounds like our son." I said, "Well, it isn't him. He's right there. Besides, I don't hear anything." She then stands up and says, "Wow, he's really crying out for help. I need to go look for him." Now at this point, if you knew my wife, you would know she is absolutely creeped out by the woods and wouldn't be caught dead walking into them during daylight, much less at night during a storm. I grabbed her hand and said, "I have been listening intently, and there is absolutely nobody calling out for help. You need to stay here." At this point, I am getting worried about her. She was acting completely out of character, not to mention that at this time she is 8 months pregnant with our baby daughter. She then says, "What if there is some child out there lost in the woods?" I said, "Well, first off, I would be able to hear them too. Secondly, there are no other kids around here for miles, and the odds of them being lost 100 feet from our house that's lit up like a Christmas tree is nil." She then says, "I know, but what if it's a kid?" Before I could say anything else, she stands up and starts walking toward the stairs. I jumped up and grabbed her hand again and said, "No, you're not. Get in the house. I don't know what's going on, but you need to go inside." She then complies, and we both go inside. I didn't know what this was, but it freaked me out. A few months after this, just as it was getting dark outside, I heard the front door to our house open, and I got up to investigate. We have autistic 6-year-old twins, and we have the door set up so that they can't open it without us there. So to hear this sound, it could only be my wife. What was weird was the fact that she usually doesn't go outside without saying something to me. I walked out front and saw my wife walking down our private road towards the drive on the side of our house. I asked her what she is doing, and she says she was sitting on the back patio and kept hearing a baby crying out in the woods. I said, "Seriously? And you just decided to walk off into the woods to investigate?" She then looks out into the woods and says, "See? There it is again. Again, I can't hear anything." But what I did notice is that it was completely silent out again. I told her, just like before, the chances of a baby being out in the woods outside our house is slim and that she needed to get back in the house. She said, "What if someone left a baby out there?" I said, "Well, if that were true, I would hear it too." Now at this point, I was really starting to worry about my wife's mental health. I actually asked her to see a psychiatrist, and she did. Now looking back, I feel really bad about this, knowing what I know. A key to this moment was that my wife had just given birth to a baby girl a month before. A few days after this, we were out front on the porch. It's early evening, and I had just mowed the lawn this day, and our 3-year-old son was riding around on his little car in front of the house. Now he knows that he is not allowed outside of a certain area that we mapped off. He loves playing outside, but with the road behind 50 feet from our front porch, we have to be careful, as a lot of boaters will fly through after drinking all day on their boats. As we are talking, we are both keeping an eye on him. A neighbor drives by and stops to say hi for a second. This interaction took approximately 8 seconds, as all they said was, "How are things?" We said good, and he told us he would stop by later as his wife got something for the kids, who happens to be one of their teachers in school. And we said, "Okay, great," and he drove off. I looked over where our son was, and he was gone. I called out his name and ran over to the side of the house and could hear his car on our side drive. I scolded him for leaving the area, and he said something in his 3-year-old gibberish and pointed to the woods behind our house. I said he had 5 seconds to get back up to the front of the house or else, and he adamantly pointed back in the direction of the woods and kept trying to tell me something. I looked off in the direction of the woods and just assumed he saw a deer or squirrel or something and wanted to see it up close. I walked him back up to the front of the house, and he cried the whole way there. He got really upset that I wouldn't let him go into the woods, but I just wrote this off as him being curious, and most 3-year-old boys are. Now this instance isn't isolated, as our twins have done similar things, but nothing quite as extreme as this. There have been nights where we had just laid down for the night and heard a loud bang on the side of our house on the wall behind our bed. It was so loud that I jumped up and looked out the window. Our floodlight had come on, but I could see nothing. Now the weird part about this is that our bedroom sits about 12 feet from the ground level, as we have a full-size basement that's cinder block. I put on my slippers and grabbed one of my 12-gauge shotguns and walked outside to investigate. It was dead silent again. The floodlight that's on the side of the house had clicked off at this point, so I walked over to the end of the deck and shined my light around the yard. There was nothing. I walked around the house and shined the light around intently. As I approached the back side of my house, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. It felt like someone was watching me. I shined the light up in the trees, but again, nothing. I rounded the corner, and the first thing I noticed was that my 3 dogs that were in their area weren't making a peep. Now our dogs have no filter and will bark at anyone and everyone. This includes me. So to see them all hiding with their tails between their legs, not making a peep, really had me worried. As I kept walking, all of a sudden the crickets and frogs started making sounds again. It was as if someone had clicked a switch. I walked back into the house and told my wife that I hadn't seen anything. She shrugged and said, "Okay, as long as our dogs were okay." Due to the circumstances that night, I decided to let the dogs in and sleep with us. This very same thing has happened on all 4 exterior walls of our house. It's random and annoying, but just like this instance, every time there is nothing going on outside. There have also been times where we were sitting in the house, and as I was watching a movie, my wife walked over to me and said, "Did you call me?" I said no, and she said she swears she heard me call her name in her ear. She said that it was definitely my voice, but she didn't understand because it sounded so close. and I was a good 20 feet away from her in my recliner. The important part to this was that she was sitting at the table doing something, and the slider to the backyard was open behind her. Now, our back patio sits about 20 feet off the ground and is like a balcony, as it has no stair access outside. I think the previous owner built it for a barbecuing. There have been several instances where she would say she heard someone whisper in her ear, but she couldn't make out the sound. Again, I kept thinking she was going crazy, but as you will see, I think all of this is tied into this final moment where things are revealed. The last thing I want to mention before we get into what just happened is that I have a shooting range built behind my workshop on opposite side of our property next to the main road. It is kind of on a downslope, but it works perfectly for what I need it for. The range itself is cut straight into the woods, going down about 100 yards or so. When you're at the down range, you have woods surrounding you on all sides, except back up to my shop. I have to say it has always felt creepy when I am dealing with my targets or mowing. When you are down there, it feels like you're miles from anyone. One day around 5 in the evening, I was sighting in a new rifle scope. The sun was still up but was going to start to fade soon. So I knew this was going to be the final test. Up until this point, nothing really happened while I was making my multiple trips downrange, other than this feeling of uneasiness. As I got downrange, I kept getting this feeling like someone or something was watching me. I looked around but didn't see anything. As I was placing stickers over my previous shots, I heard something big off to the side of me. It sounded like a large branch had snapped off a tree. Now, if you have been in Tennessee woods, you will know that a lot of branches fall off of trees randomly out of nowhere, so this is nothing new. Except this time, it was very loud and sounded like fresh, strong wood, if that makes any sense. I turned and looked, but again couldn't see anything. I started walking back up to my rifle, and I swear I heard someone right behind me. I turned around, but again saw nothing. As I started to walk again, I heard this deep growl. It was really deep and loud, and what's worse is that it was all around me. I turned around facing the range and started walking backwards. The thought of some rabid dog charging out of the bushes had me freaked out, so running wasn't a good idea. I slowly walked backwards up the hill to my rifle, but nothing happened. I grabbed my rifle and sprayed the target with rapid fire, hoping to scare off whatever was stalking me. I left 10 rounds in the mag and grabbed my rifle bag and quickly walked back up to the house. I never told my wife about this as I didn't want her to freak out. Fast forward about a year later from when we moved in, and my niece is staying with us as a live-in nanny to earn money over summer break from college. We were on our way back from the store and about a mile from our house, and I saw 2 eyes reflecting in the headlights coming from a wide tree on the side of the road just ahead. It had caught my attention because they were higher than a deer but a different color and size. Just as I had said, "What is that?" and squinted, they vanished. I had made a comment that it was almost as if it had known I could see its eyes and moved. The color was kind of a golden/green, but they resembled the mannerism of a large cat as they felt ominous. It's hard to explain, but I shrugged it off as we were passing the tree and saw nothing. A few moments later, we arrived at the house. As we were getting bags out of the car, my 3-year-old son came bolting out of the house, excited to see me. As I was waiting to help her carry in her bags, I heard my dog growl. I looked in the direction she was looking at my neighbor's property across the street. Now what I saw has kept me up all night. Up until this point, I have always been skeptical, as I had never seen anything with my own 2 eyes. Even with what had happened to me the year prior, I still had my doubts that it was just my mind playing tricks on me. Now, my street is kind of a spread out neighborhood. Each house sits on several acres, and at the end of our road is Kentucky Lake. My neighbor's house sits adjacent to my house on about an acre lot. Directly in front of my house is a wall of woods, and directly behind my house is several thousand acres of untouched forest. As I was looking across the street to my neighbor's property, I saw a large, dark figure between the trees at first. The movement caught me off guard as it looked like something big moving quickly on all 4s. Then, when it came out into clear view, it stood up and walked like a man. At first, I didn't know what to make of it. It was very tall, but what was strange about it was the distance it was covering, and the fact that when it was in front of his shed, I swear I could see through it. It was clearly walking quickly, but moving faster than any person could at a sprint. More importantly, there was no sound. It was like it was phasing in and out of reality as it moved. I said, "What the hell is that?" and realized that it was looking directly at us. It had moved at an angle away from us to minimize its time out in the open and moving quickly as it could while still being silent. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up as I realized that whatever it was stalking us. I told my niece to get in the house now, and I grabbed my son and booked it inside. I grabbed my Arkansas 15 with a short scope and came back outside to see my niece still grabbing stuff out of her car. Knowing I told her firmly and clearly to get in the house, her disregard to my command annoyed me. but still I watched over her without saying a word. As she was slowly walking, she turned towards the woods across the street from my house and suddenly bolted for the house. She ran up the steps in a panicked state. I asked her what she saw, and her face was pale as a ghost. She said, "I heard something big in the woods walking loudly on the leaves, and when I turned toward it, I heard a deep, guttural growl." I asked her why she didn't come when I told her, and she said she thought that I was talking to my son. I told her what I had seen, and she wanted to get a closer look to see if she could see something. I told her that it was not a good idea, and she went anyway. As she was walking down the walkway, I heard the sound of dry leaves crunching in the woods across the street. I told her to stop and come take the flashlight. Now at this point, she is about 6 feet away from my wife's SUV. As she turned and started walking back to me, I caught a glimpse of something gray and hairy bolt from behind the SUV back across the street into the woods. My porch is a raised porch, and our SUV is about 6.5 feet tall. And whatever this was, it cleared about 45 feet in what looked like a single jump. It moved like lightning. Whatever it was, it wanted my niece. It jumped behind the car out of my line of sight and was waiting for her. She still doubted my warnings and grabbed the flashlight and walked back toward the car. As she entered my driveway, she stopped dead in her tracks, leaned forward as if she could see something. I asked her what she saw. She turned and ran back up on the porch with a terrified look on her face, saying, "Nope, nope, nope," over and over again. She said it was a figure hiding inside of a tree and that she saw its eyes. I asked her what they looked like, and all she could say was that they looked dull red at first. But as she got closer, they looked dead. I said, "What do you mean dead?" And she said that where the pupils were looked gray, like the way eyes look when they go blind. She said it was really dark gray, and she swears she could see through it almost like a dark cloud. She wanted to go out again and took a step down the stairs, and as she did, it revealed itself from the tree. I said, "Get inside," and I went in and locked the door. It looked like a tall, human-shaped being. It was really tall and looked ominous as hell. The next morning, we did a height comparison to the tree limb she saw it stand over, and it put its height to around 9 feet tall and its eyes were about 6 inches apart. At this point, I don't know what this thing was. After doing some research, I think this thing was a glimmerman/crawler. I looked to see if there had been any other sightings in Benton County, but nothing. More importantly, I swear it would phase in and out, almost like a shadow person, but bigger and more obvious. Now, I originally posted this ONR/Bigfoot, but after doing a bunch of research, I believe this belongs here. One of the things that makes this fit is that it can communicate telepathically. This explains why everyone was hearing something that nobody else could hear. Secondly, it has a playback-like communication, so when I heard a dog panting, it was probably one of my dogs that had heard. My wife was actually hearing our son crying for help, as he had recently fell and cried for help. The baby crying would be our newborn baby, who she had given birth to recently. And it must have heard me call my wife's name and kept telepathically calling my wife's name with my voice. Another thing that my niece had said that night was that she felt compelled to go back outside to it. She said she felt like this thing was communicating with her somehow, and it wanted her to go back outside. The more I read about this thing, the more everything that's been happening over this past year makes sense. One thing that I find extra convincing is that down the road towards the lake, there is a property that is barbed wired off and is a wall of forest with no driveway. A lot of the property down our road is undeveloped owned land, and on one of the trees there is this large old sign that says, "Screamer lives here," with an arrow pointing back into the woods. Now I have to admit, when I first saw this sign, I laughed, thinking maybe the owner screamed at trespassers who entered his property, and teenagers put up the sign to mess with him. But when I did a satellite search of our neighborhood, that entire section of road has no houses or trails or anything, and is just pure forest for as far as the eye can see. One of the things that this thing is said to do is make a loud scream when threatened. About a year ago, I moved my family and I to a home way out in the woods in Tennessee. I wanted to be brief here, but I need to get this off my chest, and after looking into this matter a little more, I have a lot more details that I think will paint a clear picture in the end. So please bear with me. The nights here can be extremely loud. Between the crickets, the tree frogs, and the cicadas, it can almost be deafening. One night, not too long after we moved in, I had forgotten something in my car and headed outside to get it. The first thing that struck me as odd was that my dog wouldn't go outside with me. My dog goes everywhere with me, as I am her whole world. But not this night. As I held the door open, she looked out, then looked up at me like, nope. So I walked out and shut the door behind me. The second thing that caught me off guard was that there was not a peep. It was dead silent. Still shrugged this off and walked down my front steps and headed down to my car. When I had gotten about 10 feet from my car, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I felt as though something was watching me. I looked around but saw nothing. After I reached in my car for what I had forgotten to grab earlier, I had this feeling like something was moving towards me. I took a step back and checked around me. All of a sudden, I heard one of my hedges next to me that lined the walkway to our front door rattle. At first, I thought it was a rabbit that I had spooked, as I had seen one just earlier in the day right where this was. A few seconds later, I heard the sound of a large rock, about the size of a cantaloupe, landing a few feet away from me. It hit the walkway and bounced into a shrub. I drew my gun and called out and said, "Whoever this was is about to be shot." After a few seconds of nothing, I began to think that maybe this was some local teenagers messing with the new people. I holstered my sidearm, turned, and started walking back to my front door. Almost as soon as I turned towards my house, I heard this deep panting sound. It sounded like a huge dog. But what made me nope back to my front door was that it sounded like it was right behind me. I leaped up onto my porch, turned, and drew my gun again, expecting something right there. But again, there was nothing. A couple weeks later, I was on my porch at night, sitting on a bench with my wife. She got up and walked inside to get something, and as soon as she shut the door, I heard that panting sound again. I couldn't see anything, yet this sounded like it was right on top of me. The sound was coming from everywhere, and it was very loud. Again, I couldn't see anything, so I noped it back inside my house. Now, at this point, I was questioning moving here, but after nothing else really happening, I let it go. A month or so later, it was a really rainy and stormy night. This is around 9 p.m., and my wife and I enjoy listening to the rain and talking about how relaxing the rain is. Me growing up in Oregon loved the rain, and for the past 10 years we lived in Vegas, where it would dump the entire year of rain in a day, then be bone dry for the rest of the year. For my wife, who grew up in Nevada, rain was such a rare thing. She loved going outside and watching the rain. So for us, this is an enjoyable experience, except this night in particular, things took a weird turn. As we were sitting there talking about the rain and relaxing, my wife stops me and said, "Did you hear that?" I said, "No, what did you hear?" She said, "I swear it sounded like a small child calling for help out in the woods beside our house." I said, "No, I didn't hear anything." After a few moments of us listening intently, she said, "There it is again." I said, "I didn't hear a thing, sweetie. Are you sure you're not just hearing things?" She looked at me, offended that I didn't hear anything, and said, "No, I am positive. How could you not hear that? It was our son. I think he's out there and got lost." I said, "No, he's in the house sleeping on the couch." We then both looked through the blinds that were open right behind us, and we could see all of our children laying there. She said, "That's so weird. I swear it sounds like our son." I said, "Well, it isn't him. He's right there. Besides, I don't hear anything." She then stands up and says, "Wow, he's really crying out for help. I need to go look for him." Now at this point, if you knew my wife, you would know she is absolutely creeped out by the woods and wouldn't be caught dead walking into them during daylight, much less at night during a storm. I grabbed her hand and said, "I have been listening intently, and there is absolutely nobody calling out for help. You need to stay here." At this point, I am getting worried about her. She was acting completely out of character, not to mention that at this time she is 8 months pregnant with our baby daughter. She then says, "What if there is some child out there lost in the woods?" I said, "Well, first off, I would be able to hear them too. Secondly, there are no other kids around here for miles, and the odds of them being lost 100 feet from our house that's lit up like a Christmas tree is nil." She then says, "I know, but what if it's a kid?" Before I could say anything else, she stands up and starts walking toward the stairs. I jumped up and grabbed her hand again and said, "No, you're not. Get in the house. I don't know what's going on, but you need to go inside." She then complies, and we both go inside. I didn't know what this was, but it freaked me out. A few months after this, just as it was getting dark outside, I heard the front door to our house open, and I got up to investigate. We have autistic 6-year-old twins, and we have the doors set up so that they can't open it without us there. So to hear this sound, it could only be my wife. What was weird was the fact that she usually doesn't go outside without saying something to me. I walked out front and saw my wife walking down our private road towards the drive on the side of our house. I asked her what she is doing, and she says she was sitting on the back patio and kept hearing a baby crying out in the woods. I said, "Seriously? And you just decided to walk off into the woods to investigate?" She then looks out into the woods and says, "See? There it is again. Again, I can't hear anything. But what I did notice is that it was completely silent out again." I told her, just like before, the chances of a baby being out in the woods outside our house is slim and that she needed to get back in the house. She said, "What if someone left a baby out there?" I said, "Well, if that were true, I would hear it too." Now at this point, I was really starting to worry about my wife's mental health. I actually asked her to see a psychiatrist, and she did. Now looking back, I feel really bad about this, knowing what I know. A key to this moment was that my wife had just given birth to a baby girl a month before. A few days after this, we were out front on the porch. It's early evening, and I had just mowed the lawn this day, and our 3-year-old son was riding around on his little car in front of the house. Now he knows that he is not allowed outside of a certain area that we mapped off. He loves playing outside, but with the road behind 50 feet from our front porch, we have to be careful, as a lot of boaters will fly through after drinking all day on their boats. As we are talking, we are both keeping an eye on him. A neighbor drives by and stops to say hi for a second. This interaction took approximately 8 seconds, as all they said was, "How are things?" We said good, and he told us he would stop by later as his wife got something for the kids, who happens to be one of their teachers in school, and we said, "Okay, great," and he drove off. I looked over where our son was, and he was gone. I called out his name and ran over to the side of the house and could hear his car on our side drive. I scolded him for leaving the area, and he said something in his 3-year-old gibberish and pointed to the woods behind our house. I said he had 5 seconds to get back up to the front of the house or else, and he adamantly pointed back in the direction of the woods and kept trying to tell me something. I looked off in the direction of the woods and just assumed he saw a deer or squirrel or something and wanted to see it up close. I walked him back up to the front of the house and he cried the whole way there. He got really upset that I wouldn't let him go into the woods, but I just wrote this off as him being curious. And most 3-year-old boys are. Now, this instance isn't isolated, as our twins have done similar things, but nothing quite as extreme as this. There have been nights where we had just laid down for the night and heard a loud bang on the side of our house on the wall behind our bed. It was so loud that I jumped up and looked out the window. Our floodlight had come on, but I could see nothing. Now, the weird part about this is that our bedroom sits about 12 feet from the ground level, as we have a full-size basement that's cinder block. I put on my slippers and grabbed one of my 12-gauge shotguns and walked outside to investigate. It was dead silent again. The floodlight that's on the side of the house had clicked off at this point, so I walked over to the end of the deck and shined my light around the yard. There was nothing. I walked around the house and shined the light around intently. As I approached the back side of my house, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. It felt like someone was watching me. I shined the light up in the trees, but again, nothing. I rounded the corner, and the first thing I noticed was that my 3 dogs that were in their area weren't making a peep. Now, our dogs have no filter and will bark at anyone and everyone. This includes me. So to see them all hiding with their tails between their legs, not making a peep, really had me worried. As I kept walking, all of a sudden the crickets and frogs started making sounds again. It was as if someone had clicked a switch. I walked back into the house and told my wife that I hadn't seen anything. She shrugged and said okay, as long as our dogs were okay. Due to the circumstances that night, I decided to let the dogs in and sleep with us. This very same thing has happened on all 4 exterior walls of our house. It's random and annoying, but just like this instance, every time there is nothing going on outside. There have also been times where we were sitting in the house, and as I was watching a movie, my wife walked over to me and said, "Did you call me?" I said no, and she said she swears she heard me call her name in her ear. She said that it was definitely my voice, but she didn't understand because it sounded so close, and I was a good 20 feet away from her in my recliner. The important part to this was that she was sitting at the table doing something, and the slider to the backyard was open behind her. Now, our back patio sits about 20 feet off the ground and is like a balcony, as it has no stair access outside. I think the previous owner built it for a barbecuing. There have been several instances where she would say she heard someone whisper in her ear, but she couldn't make out the sound. Again, I kept thinking she was going crazy, but as you will see, I think all of this is tied into this final moment where things are revealed. The last thing I want to mention before we get into what just happened is that I have a shooting range built behind my workshop on opposite side of our property next to the main road. It is kind of on a downslope, but it works perfectly for what I need it for. The range itself is cut straight into the woods, going down about 100 yards or so. When you're at the down range, you have woods surrounding you on all sides, except back up to my shop. I have to say, it has always felt creepy when I am dealing with my targets or mowing. When you are down there, it feels like you're miles from anyone. One day around 5 in the evening, I was sighting in a new rifle scope. The sun was still up, but was going to start to fade soon. So I knew this was going to be the final test. Up until this point, nothing really happened while I was making my multiple trips downrange, other than this feeling of uneasiness. As I got downrange, I kept getting this feeling like someone or something was watching me. I looked around but didn't see anything. As I was placing stickers over my previous shots, I heard something big off to the side of me. It sounded like a large branch had snapped off a tree. Now, if you have been in Tennessee woods, you will know that a lot of branches fall off of trees randomly out of nowhere. So this is nothing new. Except this time, it was very loud. and sounded like fresh, strong wood, if that makes any sense. I turned and looked, but again couldn't see anything. I started walking back up to my rifle, and I swear I heard someone right behind me. I turned around, but again saw nothing. As I started to walk again, I heard this deep growl. It was really deep and loud, and what's worse is that it was all around me. I turned around facing the range and started walking backwards. The thought of some rabid dog charging out of the bushes had me freaked out, so running wasn't a good idea. I slowly walked backwards up the hill to my rifle, but nothing happened. I grabbed my rifle and sprayed the target with rapid fire, hoping to scare off whatever was stalking me. I left 10 rounds in the mag and grabbed my rifle bag and quickly walked back up to the house. I never told my wife about this as I didn't want her to freak out. Fast forward about a year later from when we moved in, and my niece is staying with us as a live-in nanny to earn money over summer break from college. We were on our way back from the store and about a mile from our house, and I saw 2 eyes reflecting in the headlights coming from a wide tree on the side of the road just ahead. It had caught my attention because they were higher than a deer but a different color and size. Just as I had said, "What is that?" and squinted, they vanished. I had made a comment that it was almost as if it had known I could see its eyes and moved. The color was kind of a golden/green, but they resembled the mannerism of a large cat as they felt ominous. It's hard to explain, but I shrugged it off as we were passing the tree and saw nothing. A few moments later, we arrived at the house. As we were getting bags out of the car, my 3-year-old son came bolting out of the house, excited to see me. As I was waiting to help her carry in her bags, I heard my dog growl. I looked in the direction she was looking at my neighbor's property across the street. Now what I saw has kept me up all night. Up until this point, I have always been skeptical, as I had never seen anything with my own 2 eyes. Even with what had happened to me the year prior, I still had my doubts that it was just my mind playing tricks on me. Now my street is kind of a spread out neighborhood. Each house sits on several acres, and at the end of our road is Kentucky Lake. My neighbor's house sits adjacent to my house on about an acre lot. Directly in front of my house is a wall of woods, and directly behind my house is several thousand acres of untouched forest. As I was looking across the street to my neighbor's property, I saw a large, dark figure between the trees at first. The movement caught me off guard as it looked like something big moving quickly on all 4s. Then, when it came out into clear view, it stood up and walked like a man. At first, I didn't know what to make of it. It was very tall, but what was strange about it was the distance it was covering, and the fact that when it was in front of his shed, I swear I could see through it. It was clearly walking quickly, but moving faster than any person could at a sprint. More importantly, there was no sound. It was like it was phasing in and out of reality as it moved. I said, "What the hell is that?" and realized that it was looking directly at us. It had moved at an angle away from us to minimize its time out in the open and moving quickly as it could while still being silent. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up as I realized that whatever it was stalking us. I told my niece to get in the house now, and I grabbed my son and booked it inside. I grabbed my Arkansas 15 with a short scope and came back outside to see my niece still grabbing stuff out of her car. Knowing I told her firmly and clearly to get in the house, her disregard to my command annoyed me, but still I watched over her without saying a word. As she was slowly walking, she turned towards the woods across the street from my house and suddenly bolted for the house. She ran up the steps in a panicked state. I asked her what she saw, and her face was pale as a ghost. She said, "I heard something big in the woods walking loudly on the leaves, and when I turned toward it, I heard a deep, guttural growl." I asked her why she didn't come when I told her, and she said she thought that I was talking to my son. I told her what I had seen, and she wanted to get a closer look to see if she could see something. I told her that it was not a good idea, and she went anyway. As she was walking down the walkway, I heard the sound of dry leaves crunching in the woods across the street. I told her to stop and come take the flashlight. Now at this point, she is about 6 feet away from my wife's SUV. As she turned and started walking back to me, I caught a glimpse of something gray and hairy bolt from behind the SUV back across the street into the woods. My porch is a raised porch, and our SUV is about 6.5 feet tall. And whatever this was, it cleared about 45 feet in what looked like a single jump. It moved like lightning. Whatever it was, it wanted my niece. It jumped behind the car out of my line of sight and was waiting for her. She still doubted my warnings and grabbed the flashlight and walked back toward the car. As she entered my driveway, she stopped dead in her tracks, leaned forward as if she could see something. I asked her what she saw. She turned and ran back up on the porch with a terrified look on her face, saying, "Nope, nope, nope," over and over again. She said it was a figure hiding inside of a tree and that she saw its eyes. I asked her what they looked like, and all she could say was that they looked dull red at first, but as she got closer, they looked dead. I said, "What do you mean dead?" And she said that where the pupils were looked gray like the way eyes look when they go blind. She said it was really dark gray, and she swears she could see through it almost like a dark cloud. She wanted to go out again and took a step down the stairs, and as she did, it revealed itself from the tree. I said, "Get inside," and I went in and locked the door. It looked like a tall, human-shaped being. It was really tall and looked ominous as hell. The next morning, we did a height comparison to the tree limb she saw it stand over, and it put its height to around 9 feet tall and its eyes were about 6 inches apart. At this point, I don't know what this thing was. After doing some research, I think this thing was a glimmerman/crawler. I looked to see if there had been any other sightings in Benton County, but nothing. More importantly, I swear it would phase in and out, almost like a shadow person, but bigger and more obvious. Now, I originally posted this ONR/Bigfoot, but after doing a bunch of research, I believe this belongs here. One of the things that makes this fit is that it can communicate telepathically. This explains why everyone was hearing something that nobody else could hear. Secondly, it has a playback-like communication, so when I heard a dog panting, it was probably one of my dogs that had heard. My wife was actually hearing our son crying for help, as he had recently fell and cried for help. The baby crying would be our newborn baby, who she had given birth to recently. And it must have heard me call my wife's name and kept telepathically calling my wife's name with my voice. Another thing that my niece had said that night was that she felt compelled to go back outside to it. She said she felt like this thing was communicating with her somehow, and it wanted her to go back outside. The more I read about this thing, the more everything that's been happening over this past year makes sense. One thing that I find extra convincing is that down the road towards the lake, there is a property that is barbed wired off and is a wall of forest with no driveway. A lot of the property down our road is undeveloped, owned land. And on one of the trees, there is this large old sign that says, "Screamer lives here," with an arrow pointing back into the woods. Now, I have to admit, when I first saw this sign, I laughed, thinking maybe the owner screamed at trespassers who entered his property, and teenagers put up the sign to mess with him. But when I did a satellite search of our neighborhood, that entire section of road has no houses or trails or anything, and is just pure forest for as far as the eye can see. One of the things that this thing is said to do is make a loud scream when threatened. What's the scariest or strangest thing you've seen in a national park or national forest? I was traveling solo around the Olympic Peninsula in Washington State and making various stops in the Olympic National Park. I decided to stop in Quinault for the first time and took a random road that dead-ended at a beautiful spot at the edge of the Quinault River. There was an ancient footbridge that led across the river, but it looked like it might collapse if I tried to cross it, so I decided not to. It was off-season, and I was not in a tourist area. I was the only one there. It was so unusually hot outside that I decided that I needed to get in that water. I backed my car all the way to the edge of the dead-end road, faced it out in the direction I would need to leave, and started hiking through thick brush, down an embankment, to the edge of the water. There was no path. It was a pretty rugged area. It was mid-fall and I didn't have a suit since I didn't plan on swimming, so I just took my clothes off and got in the water in my bra and underwear. I had a nice swim, but I could not shake the feeling that I was being watched, even though I was in the middle of nowhere. After about 5 minutes, the creepy feeling was enough for me to want to head back, so I started to climb out, turned my back to the other side of the river, and walked toward my clothes and shoes that I had left behind. When I turned around, there was a big, tall man standing in plain view, just across from me on the other side of the river, but higher up on his embankment than I was on mine. He was wearing a poncho made of animal pelts, had long hair full of sticks and twigs, and looked like he had been living out in the wild for a very long time. We stood and stared at each other, me in frozen terror, for what felt like forever, when all of a sudden he frantically took off in the direction of the footbridge leading across the water. I grabbed my car key, tried to grab my clothes and shoes, but they got tangled up in some blackberry vines, so I left everything and went running for my life through the thick brush and blackberries, barefoot in my underwear, trying to make it to my car before he made it across the river. There was no doubt in my mind that he was trying to harm me. When I made it out of the blackberries, I could see he was crossing the bridge toward me rapidly. I got to my car and flung my door open just as he arrived. I locked the doors while he pounded on the hood of my car, just screaming and grunting non-verbally. The moment he went for my driver's side door, I hit the gas and took off as fast as I could. I looked back and he was chasing after me. He must have run after my car for at least a mile until he faded from view. I was bleeding everywhere from running nearly naked through blackberries. I was wet, unclothed, shaking and crying. Had I hesitated for literally 10 seconds longer, I don't think I would have made it out alive. Even typing this story out again all these years later, I am starting to shake. I felt like I was being hunted. That is the only way I can describe it. I will never, ever go back to that area. Since that moment, I always bring a hiking buddy with me when I venture out into the forest. That day is going to haunt me for life. I have had many years of therapy, and that experience is still as vivid as the day it happened. Two friends and I made a road trip out to Utah to see the national parks. We live in Virginia and set out for the 2-week trip in my truck. They don't ride. One of our stops was Canyonlands National Park, where we had permits to drive and camp on the White Rim Road. For those that don't know, the WRR is a 100-mile off-road loop that circles island in the sky. It is pretty gnarly in some sections, and very remote, with little cell service. Anyway, we had made it to our camp for the night, but had many hours of daylight left, so we decided to explore a little more, as we had heard the road was flooded out a little further. It was also 106*F that day, and the AC in the truck seemed a better option than sitting around camp. We made it less than a mile down the road when we came across an overturned BMW GS in the middle of a sandy wash. We ran over to help when we saw its rider laying on his back next to it. His helmet was off, jacket unzipped. He was foaming at the mouth, barley breathing, pale, pupils dilated, and totally unresponsive. I started what first aid I could, but he just stopped breathing while I was holding him. I tried to clear his airway and thought about trying CPR, but I knew it would be a lost cause. All I could think to do was get help. I left my friends there with water and supplies and raced back up the canyon to try and find help. At this point, we were about 12 miles from what was at one time a paved road and another 30 from any faint signs of civilization. After about 40 minutes of driving, having reached the partially paved road, I was able to get enough signal to call 911. I waited there until help arrived, in case 911 operators needed more info. As I waited, a Jeep flew by me. It was only after I had descended back into the canyon with the medics that I learned it was the rider's father, brother, and a third member of the group. I think he was an uncle. As we later learned and pieced together, the group was traveling internationally. The downed rider had not been doing well. He was getting tired, not able to handle the bike, so they left him in the shade, about a quarter mile from where we found him. Their plan was to ride out, go to Moab, rent a Jeep, and retrieve him. I can only assume that in the rider's panic or delirium, he tried to ride out on his own and made it as far as where we found him. 2 paramedics and trucks and a rescue helicopter were dispatched, the helicopter arriving shortly after the family made it back, and before me and the other paramedics made it back down. But it was all for naught. The rider didn't make it. He had a body temp of 110. I believe extreme heat and dehydration were what did it in the end. I guess I'm sharing this for a few reasons. Admittedly, it gets easier for me to process every time I share it. I'm not that old, 26, and I have never experienced anything like this in my life. But as a fellow adventure rider, it really hit close to home. I remember my first moto camping trip less than 3 years ago. A short trip on the Blue Ridge Parkway by myself. Of course I was nervous, and I thought of all the bad things that could happen. Theft, running off the road, getting hit by some idiot in a car, maybe even a bear. But I never really stopped to think just how quickly something as simple as the environment can sneak up on you. I've always tried to be prepared for the worst, but this will make me double my efforts. The words of one of the first responders still ring in my head. Mother Nature isn't cruel, she isn't evil, she is just unforgiving. Anyway, before my next trip, especially my next solo one, I will heavily be considering an in-reach device or something similar. And I hope other riders will also. And most importantly, ride safe, be safe, and remember a fellow explorer who in my mind truly embodied the life we all love so much. First time ever camping, it was for a field trip in 7th grade. God, I was miserable and I hated it, and I didn't want to be away from home. It was about 5 hours away. I couldn't sleep, so I got up in the middle of the night and walked outside, and I sat with a little book light to read in front of the cabin. I was so obsessed with Christopher Pike at that age. Holy shit. Anyway, I was super unnerved, but I couldn't stand going back into that cabin and laying on this stupid, awful wooden manger-type cot, so I stayed right there by the door. I had this weird feeling like I was being watched, but felt safe enough because it was camp. But every now and then, I just couldn't stop glancing up. It just felt weird. I can't explain it. Like hair on the back of your neck standing up weird. I guess I happened to move my book just right because the light caught on a pair of glowing eyes, like an animal, right in front of me. As a kid, I felt like they were right in front of me but must have been down the steps and a few yards back. Because I dropped the book and the light fell off to the side, I could just barely see that it was a goddamn mountain lion. I couldn't even see the full thing at first, just a paw. But then I followed it up. It saw me, and I saw it, and I could not move. In my mind, I knew two things. One, if I didn't move, someone was going to find a blood trail and then my half-eaten corpse. And 2. If I got attacked by a mountain lion because I was doing something I wasn't supposed to, my dad would be so mad. I have no idea how long I fumbled. It couldn't have been more than a few seconds, but it felt like 10 years. I reached up behind me until I found the door handle and twisted until I fell into the cabin backward, closed the door and got back into my stupid bed and laid there until sunrise. One girl woke up and I just told her the wind must have made the door bang. In the morning our teacher came to wake us up and I got in trouble for leaving my library book outside. I didn't want to get in even more trouble, so I didn't tell anyone what happened. This happened on private property, but it's a creepy story that took place in the woods, so it kinda qualifies. Plus, this morning was opening day for deer season, and we were deer hunting when it happened. My cousin owns land in western Wisconsin, where there's lots of hills and lots of deer. It's tradition for all of us to hunt on his property. My dad, cousin, and all their friends pitched in to build a hunting shack on the property and put up tree stands. We hunt on a schedule, so none of us hunt in the same area at the same time, both for our safety and in hopes of getting a deer. My dad and I took an ATV and headed up a hillside. The sun wasn't quite up yet, and we wanted to get set for sunrise. We marked which hill we were going up on the schedule inside the hunting shack. Nobody else was there yet, but we marked it anyways in case my cousin and his daughter showed up. We waited until about 9 a.m. and didn't see a thing, not even as much as a squirrel. We decided to go get some coffee to warm up and then head back out. I followed my dad down the path back to the ATV, and we'd stop every so often to listen for deer. The only noises I heard were my footsteps and my dad's. About halfway to the ATV, I heard something else. It only happened when my dad and I walked. When my dad and I walk during deer hunting, I mimic his footsteps so we make less noise. I step at the same time as him. However, something behind me was making noise. It was like something was mimicking Amy's footsteps. I spun around and peered into the trees. The sun still wasn't over the top of the hill yet, so we were in quite a bit of shade. I didn't see anything, so I continued to follow my dad down the hill. But I heard it again. This time I turned around when we were still walking, and I saw something duck behind a tree. A pale face poked out from about 30 yards up the hill and hid behind a tree again. It poked out again, and this time stayed staring down at us. I stopped and hit my dad's shoulder. He turned and saw it too. "Get to the four-wheeler," he whispered, and I didn't hesitate. I stared it down as my dad started up the ATV, and as we departed, the face's dark little shoulder came out from behind the tree, followed by the rest of its gnarled, malformed body. My dad hit the throttle, and we got back to the hunting shack as soon as we could. Nobody else was there, so we got in the truck and left. I haven't been in those woods since. My dad was, and got a deer this morning. And acts like this never happened. I still think about it far too often. There's a national park a few hours drive from us that my family likes to camp in every year. We usually drive down old logging roads and find random locations to camp in instead of using the campground. It's more private, and we found some awesome spots over the years. When I was 13, we found a really cool spot nestled between two large ponds. You follow this logging road for a few miles, and then it slowly starts to turn into overgrowth. Lots of little hills and downed trees, tall weeds, etc. At the time, we didn't have a vehicle capable of four-wheel drive, so we lugged our gear on foot and set up on the hill between the ponds. Everything went smoothly until about 2 a.m. Out of nowhere, two massive black trucks came roaring in. These trucks were literal clown cars, jam-packed with dudes. They completely ignored our camp, completely ignored our family, asking WTF they were doing so late. Didn't pay us any mind at all. They all got out of the trucks, waded into the ponds with nets, spent a little over an hour kidnapping frogs, piled back into their trucks, and left with the frogs from the pond. They did this completely silently. No lights, no talking, just quietly walking through the pond, skimming nets along. When we arrived, the ponds were overrun with frogs, and listening to them all was really cool. After the frog kidnapping, the ponds were silent and still. The following morning, we found a lone survivor with an injured leg and returned him to the pond. But the ponds stayed silent the rest of the camping trip. Frog isn't a terribly popular dish around here, but I assume they took the frogs to eat. The silent abductors were super strange though. You'd think they'd be like, "Whoa, hey, sorry to intrude, just frog hunting," or that they'd at least use flashlights. We've camped that spot a few times since then, and we've never encountered the frog kidnappers again. The following year, same park but different spot, we got robbed by a bear. Someone left an open pack of marshmallows in the beer cooler and didn't shut the lid correctly. We woke up sometime in the very early morning hours to see a black bear casually carrying off our cooler. That morning we did recover the cooler, but the marshmallows were gone and he squished a few beer cans in the process of his theft. Drove up the east coast of Australia with some mates to camp in national parks and get ludicrously intoxicated. We brought with us a grog shop's worth of booze, bags of weed, and several handfuls of magic mushroom caps. Since I wasn't driving, I decided to eat 8 of the caps before we even left our border. By the time we entered the national park and started setting up our campsite, the sun was already setting, and I was already hallucinating, meaning I was a completely unhelpful but hilarious mess of a camper. Cue grilling over the fire, drinking whiskey, and smoking gigantic doobs. At around midnight, my normal bodily functions returned in earnest, and we realized that we hadn't even looked for a dunny, shitter, outhouse, long drop before it got dark. So I grabbed a roll of shit tickets, turned on my headlamp, clutched a gigantic hunting knife between my teeth, and strolled 100 or so meters to take a dump in the river. Imagine a drug-crazed man with his pants around his ankles, squatting on a riverbank clutching a gigantic fuck-off hunting knife between his teeth, with the light from his headlamp darting around the darkness. Everywhere I pointed the light, I would see rotten, decrepit zombies shambling out of the bush around the riverbank. Never have I defecated so quickly, all the while hyperventilating and freaking out about the hallucinatory undead coming to feast on my flesh. After I got back to the campsite, the night went as well as any drug-fueled campout goes. Woke up the next morning, stepped out of my tent to take a piss only to find a public toilet block not 50 meters from our campsite. I have never laughed harder at myself than I did that morning. And that's the story of the most terrifying shit I've ever taken. In a national park, no less. I live next to 2 national forests/parks. From June to July, there was a horrific fire that prompted evacuations. My family had about 3 hours to pack anything of value. Luckily, we didn't end up having to evacuate, so I had just gotten off of work, and so had my dad. I told them we should really consider evacuating. They didn't take my advice at first, but then we saw the mountain burning. First thing I did was get all of our legal documents, birth certificates, medical files, etc. That took about a half an hour. Next, I helped my sister pack and get through her panic attacks. She was 8 at the time. It was absolutely heart-wrenching having to tell her that we can't take all of her stuffed animals, and she had to pack only a few. I had to talk her out of only bringing her stuffed animals. I ended up packing a lot for her because she was just so fucking sad. She ended up settling on a few of her favorites, and an elephant stuffed animal she got from an ambulance when she was 4. Next, I checked on my other sister. She was oddly calm. She packed everything she wanted into a small bag, and that was it. I went to help my parents, but they told me to go pack my stuff. I ended up packing some expensive stuff, like my purse collection. I also packed important items and my artwork, and then had a mental breakdown. It was summer, and I was on the top floor. I ended up overheating, and yeah, it was bad. Next was packing animal stuff. At the time, we had 12 hens, 2 guinea pigs, and 2 dogs. We packed food for everyone, and started getting stuff together. Harnesses, water bottles, food, bedding, hay, etc. By now, the fire was halfway down the mountain. I grabbed the guinea pigs and put them in their transport cage, put them by the door. My dad took a trailer from his boss. I wasn't allowed to help take anything outside, as I have life-threatening asthma and it would have been bad. Anyway, we eventually got everything moved/taken out, and by then it was night. The fire had gotten to the base of the mountain on one side. We were all exhausted. I asked my parents if we could leave, but they said not yet. I have no idea how I fell asleep, but my sisters and I all slept next to the front door that night. It was very mesmerizing. I have no idea why, but I was in a trance. It was midnight, but the flames from the burning mountain lit up the sky. It was, in a very eerie and haunting way, almost beautiful. The orange flames and purple smoke and the moonlight. Awful to say, I know, but it was like a painting. Anyway, about 2 a.m., I fell asleep. I read myself to sleep and watched the fire creep towards us. I woke up several times and thought I was dreaming, but gradually the flames were being put out. I woke up very early, at about 6 a.m. The mountain was still burning, but the 1,000-foot flames were completely gone. I woke everyone up, and we were all so grateful. A few of us were crying from joy. Several local fire departments had set up a fire line that night. That's what saved us. In the end, nobody died. A local firefighter was severely burned, but he's since recovered and is attending physical therapy. He was released from the hospital about a month or 2 ago. The night before we were prepping for evacuation, a bucket helicopter crashed. Again, nobody died. One house and several government buildings were burned. In total, about 35,000 acres were burned. That's the most horrific thing I think I've ever seen, though. I think the reason we were so affected by this is because we have had a house fire before. We were so lucky that this time we got to pack and rescue our animals. Rip Lady, you were the best lil dog. Also, R.I.P. Thunder. My poor bird passed away from a horrible accident. R.I.P. Rex, our fox. I work at an animal sanctuary, who died of heat stroke and heart attack from the fire. You'll all be missed. Not even 6 months ago. My husband, my 10-year-old bonus son, he just turned 11, myself and our dog, went on a some family road trip from Portland, Oregon, the area we live, to Mount St. Helens, on the outskirts of Courage, WA. We drove around and just kind of veered off at random down a road that looked like it may have potential hiking areas. We ended up parked at the beginning on this blocked off road where only foot traffic could carry on. We started at the very bottom of the mountain, passed by a few people that were walking back towards us in the opposite direction. As we started to walk further, they gave us a shout out that any further was patched of unmelted snow and patched ice, to which we carried on anyways, without us, as a family, really have a plan. We looked on a map on our phone and realized we were on a trailhead that lead up to Climber's Bivouac, so we decided that would be our turnaround spot. Not thinking anything of it, it's a 3-mile hike. Regardless of it being a bit of a stretch, we still had a very fun and joyful time. As we got higher though, and closer to Climber's Bivouac, the ice/snow was getting deeper, and for the most part throughout the first 2/3 of the way, was only in shaded areas. The last 1/3 of the hike, however, and especially after reaching our turnaround spot, the snow/ice was over 5 feet deep, and we were having to carefully push through since we had accidentally stepped in some soft spots that pulled our legs in, so it was very tedious. After turning around and starting to make our way back down, I had noticed that our dog had suddenly become closer and more at our sides making way back. This threw me off, because the entire way up he was running ahead, around, playing, and just loving life freely, and a little more ahead of us. But I thought nothing of it. I was and still am fully aware that up in that area there is mountain lions and other sorts of predators that are known to us, and I'm sensible enough to know predators not for sure known to us. So I immediately realized our dog was on alert about something. But he seemed to just be going along up ahead with my husband as my son and myself tailed a little behind. That one we heard it the first time. From the brush, trees, and wilderness about 20 to 25 feet behind us, to my guess, we heard something pound on the ground and let out an ape-like noise. Ooh, ooh, like almost the same noise gorillas will make on National Geographic when they are giving off a territory warning, but a little different, a lot deeper, and more sinister. My son and I froze, looking at my husband and furry companion for reassurance. With my voice shaking, I asked my husband, "Did you hear that?" He replied in a reassuring manner, "Oh, that was Spike," he started gauging and was gasping after. Spike was our dog. I questioned it, knowing for certain what I had heard and from what direction, not only to mention I've seen my dog get gagged or sick plenty before, and had never heard him make a noise like that. Regardless of my questioning, I believed him. We continued along, briefly feeling reassurance, until we heard it again, but a huge problem being, it was closer. I'm talking no more than 6 to 10 feet off to my right, into the brush of wilderness. This time, I just so happened to be focused on my dog at the time, watching his movements, and now I knew for certain my husband had lied for the sake of keeping us calm. This was not even half a mile of our way back down, so we had just a little over 2.5 miles left to go. The remainder of our way down, we heard nothing but some branches snapping. But based on my dog's behavior, whatever it was, followed us the majority of the way down, leaving us be about a 1/4 mile from our car. I will never forget that day. And I promise you, especially after that event, I never go out in the wild without packing something. Those of you that truly believe you have seen a cryptid, Bigfoot, Jersey Devil, etc., what's your story? 1. I was on a ferry for a school softball trip off Kodiak Island, AK, 2014. I was 18. A whole bunch of us had snuck up to the deck around 11 p.m. to watch the waves and smoke cigarettes and weed and generally be teenagers on a boat without supervision. It was 11 p.m. in May in Alaska, so the sun was thinking about setting, but it was still pea bright outside. So we're just doing our thing, and we notice a pod of orcas swimming with the ferry's wake, which is versus cool but not, like, unusual. If you're familiar with the dimensions of an orca fin, you know they're about 4 to 6 feet in height and look like big black spikes coming out of the water. They travel and hunt in pods of anywhere between 15 to 40 whales. Apex predators, the beautiful demon murderers of the sea, total assholes, top of the food chain. So we saw a pod of orcas, counted them to be around 10 to 15, with some babies scattered in there. Very fun to watch, took them a good 30 minutes to all go by. We tried to get pictures, but it was just dark enough that our shitty phone cameras weren't much good. Another 30 or 40 minutes go by and we've all peed much sobered up. And it's about to get dark and we're cold and sleepy and about ready to go in. No more orcas, haven't seen one for like half an hour, and then one of my JV girls spots another one. So we all turn and look. But one dorsal fin is immediately followed by another, and another, and another, and then two more, and then two more after that, in two separate rows. And they're taller, by a lot, and jagged, like some have whole chunks torn out of them. And they're all 8 to 10 feet high, and they're all attached to one creature, and we can just barely see its back slicing through the water, covered in these rows of spikes, and it just keeps coming. This thing is like 20 or 30 feet from the ferry, running parallel to it. And we are all transfixed. There's like 9 or 10 of us, and no one is saying a word because we've all turned to look at a whale. And we are all now watching something that is like horrifically, terrifyingly, obviously not a whale. Someone tries to take a picture, but it's too dark at this point, and the only reason we can see this thing is the light cast from ferry portholes. Take as old as time when it comes to things that you really fucking wish you had a picture of. But we all stand there completely scared, fucking stiff, and in awe, and we watch this thing just keep surfacing for a good 6 or 7 minutes, which means that whatever it was long. Like 60 or 70 feet long, or longer, and covered in enormous spikes that looked like they'd won thousands of battles with God knows what. It took what felt like an eternity for any of us to say anything after the last of it disappeared back into the strait. I mean, if you and like 8 of your friends had just all seen something that all science had definitely pointed to not existing, and you had all seen the same exact thing, and it was very obviously trailing, nay, hunting, not one but 15-something apex fucking predators, what do you even say to break that silence? That's the thing that eats me about the whole thing, is it was hunting. It was following them. It was literally hunting about 60 tons of toothy, angry, intelligent apex predator. Every once in a while, one of us will hit another one of us up and check in, like, do you remember this? Was I hallucinating? Did we all see the same insane, worldview melting, terrifying thing that night? And the reason I know we did is BC, none of us talked about it after that. Not during the trip, not after, not to any of our friends. BC, how the fuck do you even tell someone about something like that? Now we have almost 10 years between us, and that night, I assume some of them have probably told people. I know I tell people, because I've seen a lot of shit like that in Alaska, and I'm that bitch. And also BC, there's a very rich history among Native Alaskans of a something that lives and hunts in the waters around Kodiak, and it's important to tell its story. BC, someday it's going to eat a little too much plastic and no one will ever watch it hunt a pod of orcas from a boat ever again. 2. After my father passed away, I went to live with my friend and his mom for a little while. Things with my mom were very strained and I didn't want to stay at my friend's house initially, but they didn't want me alone during that time. Staying at anyone's house always made me feel uneasy for some reason. My first night there, early in the morning, I woke up to the sound of my bedroom door opening and a gentleman wearing a red flannel and bib denim overalls came into my room holding a bag of tools. He turned the light on, looked at me, and walked through another doorway to the utility room. Soon after, I fell asleep again, but when I woke up this time, room was dark. Everything was the same when I went to sleep the night previously. Figuring, I imagined the whole thing. I went upstairs for coffee and asked my friend's mom if the guy with the overalls is still here. With a weird look, she informed me that it's been her and I in the house all night. At this point, I'm very confused. So I explained detail about what the man looked like. Height, weight, clothes, facial hair, everything. She turns pale white and bolts to her room and retrieves a photo. When she shows me the photo, it's the man I saw in the basement that morning, even wearing the same clothes. She tells me that he passed away 30 years ago. It was her grandpa who owned the property previously. He had killed himself to save the farm when he invested his money into horses instead of machines, and his investment flopped. To keep the bank from taking the farm, on a stormy night he took a lightning rod into the middle of a pond and nature took his life when lightning struck the rod. Because of this, life insurance paid out, and his suicide saved the family diary and kept the house from being foreclosed on. 3. Working on ships. Some are pretty old and you hear some weird stories. 4 years ago during a South American season, I used to hang out with the Brazilians, fun and cool people. One was the gift shop manager. He'd rant about how his team is lazy and how they keep trying to weasel out of working because they claim to see a little girl running around the gift shop. One night we were having coffee with the head of the photography department and he's extra salty, talking about how he'll have to do an extra couple of hours because of his team. In the middle of the night, I get a call from the photo manager. She tells me our friend is in her cabin crying and shivering. I run over, thinking he got some bad news from home or something. Turns out he was working in his office. The door faces a long mirror that covers most of the wall, clothes section, And after hearing giggling, he saw the shadow of a child through the reflection, as if she was leaning to look into the door while trying to hide. Only in the reflection, he says he jumped up and ran out. The giggling and sounds of tiny feet running around the shop and into the casino. Same deck. I'm not big into the paranormal, but the following day I mentioned this to my boss and she told me that about 20 years back, a little girl came out of the theater with her parents. She was running ahead of them, around the gift shop, but eventually she went into the casino, coming out at the atrium. A drop with glass lifts that go from deck 12 to 5, so a good drop. She leaned over the railing to look down, lost her balance and fell, breaking her neck on impact and dying. Apparently it was a common sighting at the shop and casino. 4. I was working at a summer camp in the PNW one year. On the second or third night there, I was jogging alone back from the staff campfire to the cabin, where the campers and my co-counselor slept. I'm walking in this big grassy throughway that has some taller reeds separating it from a shore of the Puget Sound. It's probably 2 a.m. full moon. As I'm jogging, I see this person in the reeds. It's wearing a white gown, and it has no face, just hair. I only notice it because, as I approached it, it stood up from a crouched position, backed up joltily a few steps, then crouched down again. But I could still see it crouching there, like it was waiting. Its movements told me that it was not human. My knees gave out, and I felt flooded with fear as I collapsed. I tried to run back to my cabin, but my legs would not work. I crawled and scrambled there on all fours. I tried to scream, but no sound came out, just gasping. I finally got to my cabin and fumbled with the doorknob for what felt like a minute before I could open it. I closed the door and stood there waiting for a while inside. I didn't hear anything, but I barely slept. At some point later that night, I remember laughing, thinking, oh, it was just one of the campers peeing. I was hysterically laughing at myself for like 20 minutes, then fell asleep. Next morning, though, I realized that no campers returned to the cabin that could have potentially been out there peeing that night. I asked all of them, and all of them said they hadn't gone out to pee the previous night. I'll add that this was a camp that was overtly for non-religious, skeptically minded staff and campers, of which I was and still largely am, but I have no explanation for what I saw that night. Still scares the shit out of me just typing this. 5. One day my wife came home. We were living in an apartment in Midtown. It's about 10 p.m. and I was taking the trash to the dumpster in the alley behind my complex. The complex had only 6 two-story apartments, the front door of each facing south. We lived in number 5. And if you were to walk outside, once you open the door, there's a little raised landing where you'd put a welcome mat, step off the landing, you're on a walkway, and you have to go either left or right because there's a very tall wooden fence separating the complex from the large house next door. So if you turn right and walk down past apartments number 4 to 1, you run into a gate, go through a gate, and you're now on one of the main streets in Midtown. If you were to turn left coming out of the apartment, you will pass apartment number 6, then the laundry room, and immediately into a wrought iron gate, and immediately on the other side is the dumpster. It's a very short distance from my door to the dumpster, and with nothing to obstruct your view, you can see from the dumpster all the way down the length of the walkway to the gate at the other end of the complex. The entire area is well lit. Literally every unit would turn their front porch light on every night, and there is a street light right where the dumpster is, and one right on the other side of the street side gate. So it was easy to see my wife open the gate and head up the walkway towards our apartment. I waved at her and have no idea how she didn't see me, and I thought about yelling but didn't want to scare her or startle the neighbors. I was done emptying the garbage, so I just started walking the short distance to her. As I'm walking up, I see the door to our apartment open. Of course, I figured she opened it, but it was dark, so I didn't actually see her do it. Then she kind of leans in, and I could hear her calling my name, but she would not walk in to the apartment, our own apartment, so why not walk right in, right? Then, when I got behind her and said hi, she became frantic, asking me, "How the fuck did you do that? How did you get back outside?" I explained I'd been at the dumpster emptying the trash, to which she interrupted me, said, "No, you opened the door for me and walked upstairs. I called after you and you turned your head and looked at me, but didn't say anything and just kept walking." And then she started crying. I searched the apartment, found nothing. We moved about 6 months later to the house we're at now. One day shortly after we moved in, my wife thought she saw me walk past the windows that look into the backyard from the kitchen, but it wasn't me. And again she said it looked just like me, and that it walked all the way around the house before disappearing, and then she realized I was in the bedroom. Creepy stuff 6. When I was in high school, I worked as a courtesy clerk at Albertsons. People were always telling me that they saw me somewhere in town when I wasn't there. One day when I got out of class at the end of school, I had to go straight to work. I wouldn't get home until just after 9 o'clock that night. So I walked in just after 9 o'clock and said, "Hi, people," to my mom and my sisters, and they all looked confused. My mom asked me where I was coming from. I said I had been at work. My mom and my older sister both said, "No, you haven't. You came in hours ago, said hi people, and went upstairs." I said, "No, I didn't. I hadn't been home since I left at 7 o'clock this morning." So we all four went upstairs to my room to see who came home. My door was closed. I usually leave it open. The light was on and the TV was on. Open the door. No one there. But wait. It gets weirder. In high school, we had a secondary school called the Skill Center. It was a place that had a collection of vocational classes you could take. For instance, I took TV broadcasting, web design, and forestry. One day I was waiting for the bus to leave the Skill Center after my broadcasting class, and a teacher I never met ran up to me and said, "Zushiba, you need to come back to class." I had never been in her class, but apparently I had been missing for the last few seasons. I tried to explain I wasn't in her class, but she did seem to know who I was, so she took me to the office, thinking I was ditching. We go in and I tell the office clerk my name, and she looks me up. Sure enough, there I am in broadcasting, just like I said. But there I am, under my stepdad's last name in her class. I went by both names. It was a bit confusing, but both names were relatively unique. So it's not like there would have been a random person that looks just like me in her class. It's just extremely unlikely. I had been in her class for the entire semester, until I mysteriously stopped showing up. I had turned in work and everything, even had my goddamn signature on it. One day, this doppelganger simply stopped showing up. No one ever saw him again. 7. This was back in the late 90s, when myself and two of my friends were staying at their vacation home down on one of the local rivers. The house, think 3 small bedrooms, a sitting room/kitchen, and a small external bathroom, is on a privately owned island, not theirs, which is used for cattle grazing, and is about 3 to 4 square/miles in area. It is accessible by only one dirt road, which takes all of about 30 minutes to travel down, as it bends and winds through dense cypress swamps, full of alligators, and marsh plains. Along the road there is one other house, just as you get onto the island, which has long been abandoned. This old 2-story plantation-style home was supposedly abandoned when the owners, a married couple, child, suffered a fatal accident, and they couldn't stand being there anymore. Aside from my friend's house, the cattle farmer's home, and one other vacation home, the abandoned property is the only other structure. Well, my friends and I were out on the dock doing some night fishing, trying to land a shark or something to throw on the grill, but we hadn't had much luck. The river was as smooth as glass, which was really unusual. Because of where the dock is, the current there is usually very strong, even during the tide shift. We sat and chatted, waiting for a bite, up until about 11 p.m. Then off to our right, towards the coast, we heard a loud tone, or wail, which sounded like a mix between a ship's horn and maybe a wolf howl or something similar. An important note, the island is, by car, nearly an hour from deep water access, and probably more from actual ocean, so the likelihood that the sound was a large ship is low. So anyway, we are startled by the sound, and even my friend, who had been spending his summers there since he was in diapers, had never heard the noise before, and was bothered by it. So we decided to pack it in, since we weren't catching anything anyway, and had nearly gotten all our equipment back to the house when my second friend heard it. Coming from down the road, back towards the island access, was what sounded either like a cat meowing or a child crying. We all stood in silence, listening, and trying to figure out what it was, and where it was coming from. After listening for about 5 minutes, we decided to hop in the truck and drive down the road a ways, with the windows down, so we can try and find what was making the sound. What started out sounding like a cat was made clear as we got further up the road. That was not the case. We could clearly hear a child, and it sounded like it was saying, "Help me." We drove very slowly, calling out, and we'd wait a few minutes and hear, "Help me" again, but always further up the road, towards the swamps and the old abandoned house. We were seriously freaked out, because if there was a kid out there, why would they be going away from our calls and light into the swamp? We nearly made it all the way to the abandoned house when the sound just stopped. We waited for nearly an hour and never heard it again. We marked it up as nerves and headed back to the river house, assuming it had been an animal after all, and that we were probably just imagining it saying words. Well, after we had gotten back inside and settled in for the night, we started hearing it again. But as time passed, it came closer to us. We went out and called out again, and the sound would come closer. This went on for hours. Well, we decided we would try one more time to see if there was a kid lost or something. Again, important to note, we are miles from the next nearest people, and the noise sounded like a child, think 4-year-old. But once we got out in the truck again, the noise stopped. It's now nearly 3 in the morning, and we had been out in the sun fishing and swimming all day, so we were all tired. And after driving around a bit, calling out again, with no luck, we decide to give up. We get back inside again and get into our beds. Then we hear it, clear as a bell, "Help me," right outside the house. But it sounded so strange, like it was an echo, if that makes sense. Like it was close but far away too. And like hell if any of us were brave enough to go commando and leave the house. But we went out onto the porch, which was screened in for bugs, and listened. As soon as we went out, it would stop, go back into the beds. It would call out again, but in a different location outside the house. It circled the house, calling. All night, we all slept in the living room. But to be honest, there wasn't a lot of sleeping happening. In the morning we went out and looked for tracks around the house. As the foundation is basically sand, there wasn't a mark, no prints, animal or otherwise. And to the best of my knowledge, this never happened again to my friend or any other visitors. To this day we don't know what we heard, but it's probably the most supernatural occurrence I've experienced. 8. I'm normally pretty logical about seeing weird things. I work nights and go long periods of time without sleeping, so my mind playing tricks isn't super unusual. But this happened in broad daylight with other people around, and it has left me completely confused as to what happened. I was repairing a condenser in a very standard-looking suburban neighborhood. Directly across the street was a mother playing in her driveway with her toddler, pushing him around in one of those plastic cars. I was walking back to my work van around the side of the house when I hear a shriek, like a noise that you hear and know something is being hurt. I took a very quick few steps to clear the corner of the house and see what was happening. Mother across the street didn't seem to notice or hear or care. That's when I heard it again, but being in front of the house I could pinpoint it a little better. My head snapped to the house directly to the right of the one the mother was out front of, and I saw a small child staring directly at me with its mouth wide open, and eyes that seemed to be completely black all the way around its eye socket. I looked at the mother, sure she had to notice or at least hear the commotion. She didn't. The thing waved, not like in a come here motion, but more so acknowledging its awareness of me. I walked slowly back to the condenser and hid for maybe 5 minutes. When I came back around, it was gone, and the mother was carrying on like nothing had happened. I had no explanation for what happened, and still don't. When I went home and began to tell my girlfriend what had happened, she told me about black-eyed children. I don't know what I saw that day, but there was something so deeply upsetting about the entire situation. I'm happy calling it a cryptid if it means I'll never see them again. 9. I've shared these stories before, but I'm going to omit the story of what my buddy and I call a sea squatch, under the assumption it was an insanely huge turtle, even though I personally have never seen a turtle with a shell 6 feet across covered in barnacles, especially not in water that was 10 feet deep, and focus on old red eyes. For the sake of explaining it, from the only time I've ever seen it mentioned in writing beyond myself, Old Red Eyes is a ghost of a person, either black or Native American, that died in their task of helping slaves and escapees reach a safe haven. Their duties possibly included misleading, harassing, and, if necessary, killing any pursuers. Given the aggressive nature of the spirit, their most striking, and only, feature is the pair of piercing, glowing, scarlet orbs evenly spaced that float roughly between 6 to 7 feet in the air. They will occasionally blink out and reappear somewhere else, usually 10 feet or so away, as if they're stalking you. Now onto the story. All parts of this story take place at a friend's house that was already known as weird. The first half is second-hand and occurs roughly 15 years ago, well before we could drive ourselves, at that friend's birthday party. There's a lot of us, and I no longer remember the total number, but it was at least 8, quite possibly above 10. 3 or 4 of them decide they don't want to hang out in the hot basement and opt to go jump the fence that separates the house property from the rest of his property and run down the old riverbed. They leave, and maybe 5 to 10 minutes later, I'm hot too, and grab a soda and head up to the landing, which has a view of both stairways in the house and also the part of the property my buddies have gone off to. Not long after, those who went off to romp in the night come back screaming and pile over the fence, and his otherwise quiet dogs begin going insane. I pop the door open for them because that's easier than dealing with an electronic lock, and they stop out of breath on the front porch. A couple of buddies come up the stairs having heard the ruckus, and were treated to the tale of how they were fucking about when all of a sudden one of the bamboo bunches out there began to clatter and shake violently, shoots snapping and breaking, and some being hurled at them. We call bullshit and tell them to fuck off, get them some sodas and leave it be. Eventually, they work up the nerve to go again. But this time 2 new people decide to go with them. One of the people who was on the first run sits out, and they're bringing one of the dogs, though it takes a bit longer. They prop the gates open for the dog to squeeze through, and off they go into the woods. My buddy, who swore they were attacked by something, sits out on the front porch, as do I and another friend. 4 of them were out in the woods, and there was at least one person downstairs in the basement uninterested. We're talking trash about them while the only person who was out there defends the lot of them. Not too long after, 10 minutes tops, we hear a loud scream. The dog sets off, setting off the other dogs, and here they come piling over the fence, the dog worming through the gates like a pro. The story's a bit different this time. They couldn't shake the feeling of being watched once they got beyond able to see the lights of the house. Eventually, something made the dog growl, and they turned and saw what looked to be a pair of eyes, over 6 feet off the ground and burning scarlet, glaring at them. And then they blinked, and were gone, only to show up a few long strides to the right, then again, and with a creeping dread they realized that whatever it was slowly, gently, positioning itself between them and the house. This is what made them scream and bolt back to perceive safety, and quite safely this time. Although we called bullshit, again, a couple years later I found myself staring down the same burning red eyes over the roof of my car, staring into the front door, and in one case, staring me down before I could even crank my vehicle. While my encounters weren't as terrifying, they were still bad, and to this day, let me just say, absolutely fuck that.
Redditors, do y'all have any personal stories with cryptids? 1. I was on my way to go camping, and had just crossed the Mackinac Bridge to get to Michigan's Upper Peninsula. It was storming, and just started pouring buckets of rain. It was the kind of rain that forces you to put the windshield wipers on full speed, and you still have to slow way down and strain your eyes to see. While driving up a hill, my daughter and I saw a man standing in the middle of the road. There was not great visibility with the sheets of rain, but we both pointed out the man standing in the middle of the road, and we were worried he would get hit by a car. He turned and bent, and then it was not a man. It was a huge black dog. We both thought it was a man at first, and then it was a dog, and I can't explain it. It could have just been the combination of looking up from the bottom of a hill and the rain. I just think it is odd that my daughter and I both thought we saw a man standing up at first, and then it was a dog. I stopped on one side of the road to help it, and so did a man on the other side in a truck. I am a dog groomer, and always have slip leads in the truck. I love dogs, and always stop to help when I see one in the road. But I hope that someone else would be able to help it, because my truck was stuffed with camping stuff, and the only place it could go in my truck would have been the front seat with my daughter and me. It was still in the middle of the road, looking back and forth between the man and I. I was a bit surprised to see how big it was up close. I also felt uneasy and intimidated by this animal. It looked almost like a black German shepherd, but much bigger, but also wolfish. I have been around a lot of big dogs in my profession, and if I had to guess what breed it was, I would say a wolf hybrid. The guy yelled over, asking if it was my dog, and I yelled back, no. The dog was still in the middle of the road, looking back and forth between the man and me. In my head, I was repeating, don't pick me, don't pick me, over and over, because A, I had no room in my truck and didn't want a giant strange dog that I thought was a person at first next to my kiddo, and B, it gave me the creeps. The man then yelled, "Here, boy," and patted his leg, and the dog ran off to him. Seeing the dog was being taken care of, I got back in my truck and got back on the road towards our camping destination. My daughter was telling me how it looked like a person standing in the road, and then when it turned, it was a dog. We were both very confused. If it had been just me, I would think it was the driving rain in my imagination, but my daughter saw it as well. It may not be paranormal, but it was definitely an interesting experience. 2. I was trying to sleep in a camper van with my BF in the woods of Tennessee back in the 80s. We pulled way back into the woods on an old logging road. We parked, and were putting our sleeping bags down in the back when we heard weird noises. We turned off our lights and just sat there listening. At first I thought it sounded like tropical birds, but really, really loud. Really loud. And then it sounded more like monkeys, and we could tell it was more than 1 or 2, and they were moving towards us and spreading out like they would surround us. My BF said something like, "F this," and jumped into the driver's seat. The VW camper was a 1972 camper, and it was his baby, but we flew over the huge ruts in the dirt road. It didn't make any sense to me what happened that night, until I started listening to Bigfoot podcasts about 20 years ago. I've checked, and there are sightings on BFRO right in that area. I think we interrupted a hunt, and they were hooting and barking and trying to scare us off. It worked! It's funny because this BF was a big daredevil. It used to scare me how he'd get on his bike and draft off vehicles on the highway, or he'd stay in a place with a hurricane coming. I saw that he was just GTFO, and it made an impression on me. Occam's razor, there weren't exotic birds that turn into apes in the Blue Ridge Mountains. I didn't see them, but they sounded like some of the recordings on the Sierra Sounds. They are really the best explanation for what we heard. Pranksters could never have been so loud. and fast, running through the woods in the dark. 3. IDK, if this is really a story about a cryptid or whatever. So, this is basically a skinwalker story. Yeah, pretty basic, but it was around 2020-2021, or the COVID era, and me and my buddy, T, decided to carry shears and a machete he got from his birthday out into the woods to reopen a massive canal that had about 3 smaller trees laying in it. They weren't thick or anything, just horribly decayed and broken. These trees had created an almost weird dam that would reroute or push the water to the side of canal, basically making it a road a perfect trail for dirt bikes, four-wheelers, etc. So there we are, staring at the trees we were about to chop down and get appraised for. We just wanted to talk about it, lol. We get to work, and we get about 3 hours in and have gotten about 1/3 or 2/5 of it done, and both me and T just hear this god-awful screech. We both look in awe as we lay low behind the tree dam. We are in a 9-foot deep canal with the trees hanging off each side and reaching the bottom, so we have good cover. And we just see this creature that is almost human, but its body looks like it's wearing more of a rotting skin suit than its actual flesh. We didn't move. We didn't speak. We didn't breathe right. We both waited and watched as it slowly walked away, it making horrible noises that sounded like a mix of a dog yelping and cat hissing. It disappeared from our sight and booked it back home. Now this canal is about a mile long, so it isn't just a quick trip. We both never stopped running, and we forgot the cooler and shears. We made it back at around 7 p.m. and just sat there in his living room, petrified. The skinwalker part IDK about. It's the common thing my folk and friends talk about when it comes to their cryptids and supernatural beliefs. But this creature had a dog-like face, pale skin, narrow limbs, and a weirdly, almost primitive-like clothing for. A few years ago in South Alabama, I lived across the street from pretty dense woods. I would often walk around them in the day. It was such a beautiful place. But I always felt a certain level of uneasiness when I was out there. I was used to being in the woods, but in that area the feeling was just off. It took me a bit to notice, but even though there was a decent population of birds where I lived, there were never any in those woods. After about a month of going into the woods on a nearly daily basis, I had developed a routine where I would walk fairly deep in the woods until I reached this flat area with 4 trees overlooking a drop-off, and I would just chill there for a bit before walking back. Well, one day I made my way to that spot, and there was what I assumed to be an old metal sign or something on each of the 4 trees. They were rusted and weathered to the point where you couldn't read what was on them. But why only on those trees that I always stopped at? Why not any of the others? And who could see me stop there? That freaked me out enough to not go back. But what sealed the deal was just a few nights later I was in the kitchen with my, at the time, girlfriend around midnight, and we suddenly hear screaming coming from outside. It was so loud we thought it was right outside. We flipped the porch light on and saw nobody was there, so we walked out, and when we did, we realized the screams were coming from the woods. And it wasn't like one person screaming, it was multiple, all at the same time. These haunting, moaning, blood-curdling screams that sounded like people but at the same time sounded so inhuman. I thought maybe it could be a bunch of foxes or bobcats, but I'm familiar with the sounds they make, and those were not this. To this day, I'm unsure of what it really was out there. But one thing is for sure, I'm done with the Woods 5. It was last Sunday morning, while we were driving from Nana and Papa's house, and we were in Butler County, Ohio. I know because we had just passed the Butler County water tower 1 to 2 minutes ago, and we were driving on a bridge, and I was looking out the window trying to see if I can spot anything unusual like a UFO or UFOs or something like that, when I saw something 10 to 15 away from the bridge. After looking at it for a couple seconds, it disappeared behind some trees. Description: it looked more like it was gliding rather than flying, as I swear remembering it not flapping. Its wings. Gliding animals like flying squirrels and flying snakes do not actually have wings. They instead have expanded ribs that make them look like they have wings. It was about 3 feet in height, and was about the height of the bridge off the ground, though probably higher. It was green, and looked more reptilian than bird-like. One of the first thoughts that came to my head was a flying dragon, which again does not actually fly, but instead just glides. It is native to southeastern Asia and southern India, making a sighting of it in Butler County extremely unusual. It's also only up to 8 inches long, while the one I saw was around 3 feet in height. Strangely, the one I saw looks like the xianglong, a species of gliding lizard that lived in China but went extinct, making this thing, assuming that's what I saw, out of time, out of height. The only evidence we have of the lizard ever existing was a skeleton found in China that was 6 inches long, but that was probably a juvenile. Which might make this one a large adult, however. I feel like adults don't grow that much bigger than juveniles, maybe a couple inches to a foot, but again not much bigger. And out of place. Theories I have. Bird. I might have just seen a regular bird, and I was just remembering things wrong. Like it not flapping, and or how green and reptilian-like it was. But I do know this. If it was flapping its wings, and or it wasn't that green and reptilian-like, I probably wouldn't have gotten all excited and thought it was some kind of cryptid or something. I tried to look up birds that are 3 feet in height or similar and live in Butler County or at least Ohio as a whole. But I didn't find anything that looked similar to what I saw. Plane or other man-made aerial machines. This is the theory that makes the least sense, as it wasn't a plane, as it was flying too close to the ground, too close to the bridge, and was too small to be one or anything else meant for a person to fly. A drone makes the most sense. But I feel like I would have seen the propellers spinning or something like that. A gliding lizard, Xianglong, or a different type of unknown animal. This is obviously the cryptid explanation, as the gliding lizard lives in southern India and southeastern Asia and is up to 8 inches in height, much smaller than what I saw. And the Xianglong has been extinct for a long while. I can only assume. Other than that, I don't know what else to say, since I basically already explained it to you. 6. Not sure if it's really considered a cryptid, but I saw a ghost once. For some context, I was at my cousin's house. It's 200 years old. There has been a reported UFO sighting there like 20 years ago and a shit run of ghost sightings. Some from my cousins, some from their friends or nannies. Okay. So I was babysitting my cousins with my older sister, and after all the kids went to bed, me and my sister were hanging out in the living room. We were on the phone with my sister's best friends, and we were just talking and having a good time. Me and my sister were sitting face to face with each other. Then my cousin's dog started flipping out. He was going crazy. He even broke the living room door. I didn't think anything of it though, because he's insane, like he's jumped out of windows a bunch of times. And then I saw it, behind my sister a few steps up in the kitchen. The living room is slightly lower than the rest of the house by like 5 steps. I saw a ghost. It looked like a normal person, but like made out of fog, and I freaked out and I told her and she was pissed. She was like, shut the hell up. So I was like, haha, I was joking. Then a few minutes later, my aunt came home and my dad picked us up. I got in the car and was like, Sarah, I was not joking. Then I totally forgot about it for months until the last day of summer. My sister was sleeping over her friend's house on my last day of summer. Her school starts later than mine, and she left something at home, so me and my mom drove it over to her, but on the way there we passed a road that had a sidewalk, and I saw the exact same ghost type thing again, but this time its head turned and it looked at me then disappeared. I was freaking out. My mom was like, oh my god, are you okay? Then I told her, and she honestly believed me, because I was freaking out. 7. Where I live, there's something that looms everywhere. Lately this thing has been appearing around me. I was sitting at a friend's, and both of us noticed out of the corner of our eyes a black shape move fast, kind of like through a glass patio door. It was the size of a cat, but it had no definition to it. Just like a black, out-of-focus blob, basically. It was strange because it ran as soon as it was noticed. My friend's cat also noticed it, and stared at that spot very uncomfortably for minutes afterwards. Next night, I'm sitting in my room upstairs watching TV, and I had my left foot kind of hanging off the edge of the bed, and I'm just in a lazy, relaxed pose. All of a sudden, I feel something kind of pushing against my foot like it's a cat that stands up and puts their paws on you like it wants to be pet. Well, that's what immediately came to mind. Then I realized, wait, I don't have any animals in my home. Now, as soon as I noticed the pressure on my foot, I again, from my shallow peripheral vision, seen a black blob shoot down to the floor. This is kind of a collective, maybe I'm just seeing shit, collective mention, that I've been seeing a black little ball at random times every other day. But it could just be nothing, but I thought it's worth adding. I'm pretty sudé cognitively, so there's no reason for me to be hallucinating these instances. It only validates it more when other people see the same thing when these things occur. Plus, a cat, lol. I could type for days all the weird, unexplainable things I've seen just in the past 6 or so years. 8. I've seen one also. My girlfriend at the time, her sister, and I all went to pick up my girlfriend's sister's boyfriend from work one night. This was in a very rural area, by the way. On the way there, we saw something that looked like a Lycan from Underworld run in front of my girlfriend's sister's Tahoe and stare at us with glowing red fluorescent eyes as if we're driving in slow-mo as it cleared our path. It was fast. I thought it was a very large wild hog or bear, but it was too slender and uniquely shaped. We were in a Tahoe, and it was at eye level with us, and we were elevated. So I would have to say it was around 6 to 7 feet tall, standing up with long muscular arms and neck, large shoulders, and unproportioned hind legs like a dog, but bigger. We all looked at each yelling, WTF was that? But we were in such shock we didn't think about what it was until we got home. And boy did we have a story to tell. I saw every animal you could see in Arkansas. There is no mistaking this for anything out there. It is what it is. There's only 5 of us on this camping trip, but keep counting 6. There were bright flashes of red in the sky. It's as if someone was waving around a flare light from space. Faint, but noticeable. We all made UFO jokes and laughed as we nailed our tents into the ground. I knew for sure that there were 5 of us. We have all been friends since early middle school, and we're celebrating our high school graduation with this getaway camping trip. The flashes of red must have stopped randomly as we made conversation while fixing up our tents. Dave managed to put his tent together the fastest and told us he was going to find some branches for the fire. I remember how he had worked with me at the local gas station last year. We used to do the night shift together, and it had made working at a desolate gas station much more fun than it was supposed to be. There was also Eric in the corner, still reading his tent manual, fidgeting with his signature round glasses. I wasn't as close with Eric as I was with the others, but I still remember sitting with him in math class and copying his homework one time. Ava was also there talking with Sally, my cousin. Both had decided to team up and work on one tent at a time. I also have clear memories of them hanging around at school in our usual places. In fact, I even knew Ava's younger brother as he used to beg to go with us wherever we went. I bring all this up because I'm sure that there were 5 of us, including me, and that I knew everyone in the group. So Dave had went to get some branches as we pulled out some foldable chairs and set them up around the fire pit. I remember feeling uneasy as the sun set and darkness began to consume the forest. The shadows of trees elongated around us as the minutes ticked by. Eric went to get a flashlight from his bag, while we wondered what was taking Dave so long. He appeared soon after, the harsh rustling sounds of the bushes signifying his return. We were all buried in our chairs at this point, covered by our jackets. The temperature had dropped quickly, and a slight breeze was beginning to pick up. "Geez, you guys weren't even bothered to pull out a chair for me," Dave said as he arranged all the branches in the pit. We had set up 5 chairs around the fire. I tried to rationalize the situation, but no matter how hard I focused, my head felt like it was underwater. I had perfect clarity up until that moment, but when I tried to focus on why 5 chairs were occupied when Dave hadn't sat down yet, my head seemed to just stop working, as if something was reaching in and pulling out my thoughts. Instinctually, I felt even more uneasy now, and I had placed why. The whole forest had gone dead silent. I looked around at the faces of the others and could tell that they had felt the same. Eric was fidgeting with his fingers, trying to scan around the group and spot the extra person, but it was futile. I scanned every face, each etched in worry and frowning and frustration except for, "It's..." "All right, I'll get the chair myself," Dave said, breaking the silence and somewhat alleviating the tension. I got up and offered to help him. He looked into my eyes and nodded knowingly. We headed away from the fire pit towards the tents, but I kept my eyes glued on our group. "How many people are here?" I whispered to Dave as he looked around and realized that we had indeed only packed 5 chairs. In fact, every person had brought with them their own chair. They were heavy to carry, and we wouldn't bring any extra needlessly. "There's 5, right?" There's 5 chairs," Dave replied. His voice wavered as he spoke. "No, I just think maybe one of us forgot our chair," I said. My mind was struggling to address the issue head-on, and now sought to find rational excuses instead. I didn't quite feel in control of my thoughts. It felt like swimming in a dream, and if I tried to force myself to think about who the 6th person was, my head would begin to throb. "Yeah, that sounds about right, actually," Dave said, relaxing and heading back to the group. When we walked back to the fire pit and circle of chairs, 2 chairs were empty. One for me and one for Dave. Everything was adding up now, even though we all agreed it wasn't before. Sally suggested we were all probably tired after the long hike to get here, and probably just needed some sleep. She could have been right. We were all sleep deprived from waking up very early today to make it on time. Ava brought out the drinks. The whole 6-pack was emptied. We all moved closer to the crackling fire for warmth, as we took sips from our cans and reminisced on memories of last year. Ava was in the middle of telling us about that one time she was home alone with weird things happening in her house when I got these sudden chills despite the pleasant warmth of the fire. What felt cozy and safe moments ago felt wrong now, all because I realized that there was a crucial detail I missed. Who started the fire? I asked, completely interrupting Ava in the middle of her story and breaking everyone else's immersion. Everyone looked momentarily annoyed until they realized they had no answer. Once again, I scanned the faces staring back at me, all barely illuminated by the light from the fire, all familiar and pale from fear. "Wasn't it you, Dave?" Eric asked. Dave shook his head. "I think the person standing behind Jenny did it," Sally said, looking over at me. I whipped my head around so quickly it hurt. My heart was pounding in my ears. There was nothing behind me except for the encompassing darkness of the woods. Staring at those tall, dark trees behind me made me feel exposed. I felt like a lost bird in a vast field. "Wait, I don't know," Sally said. Her eyes had gone wide and she was shaking visibly. She continued to look around frantically as Ava moved over to her, placing her hands on her shoulders and trying to calm her down. "I think we should leave this place," Ava stuttered. "Yeah, something just doesn't feel right, but I can't put my finger on it," Dave said. "But it's so dark out in the forest now, we'd probably get lost if we leave now," someone else said. "Yeah, I think we should stay the night and leave as soon as we can tomorrow," Eric agreed. I tried to protest but realized Eric was right. The woods harbored an oppressive darkness within which navigation would be near impossible. "Let's not sleep in our separate tents just to be safe," Sally said. We all agreed. We only brought one person tents with us, but we could squeeze two if we tried. That way no one would be alone at night. Following this conversation, we all got up and made our pairs. I went with Dave and Sally like always went with Ava. Eric kept complaining that he didn't have a pair, but we reassured him he did. He wouldn't accept it. I feel like at some point we all realized that there were only 5 of us, and suddenly we were all huddling up in the middle of the clearing. "Why do we keep thinking there are 6 of us here?" Eric asked. Sweat was dripping down his face despite the cold. We had nearly left him all alone on his own under the assumption that there was another person. My stomach turned as I squeezed my eyes shut and tried to mentally recap everyone here. My head throbbed, but I kept pushing it. "There's me, Dave, Eric, Ava, Sally, and..." I was pointing at each of them as I said the name. I retched and emptied the contents of my stomach on the ground when I got past Sally. The left side of my head felt like there was a knife stuck in it. My vision was blurry. Dave held me up to stop me from collapsing, and we all wordlessly started to move towards the tents as someone put the fire out. Dave helped me into a tent while the 4 outside discussed what to do. I could only focus on snippets of the conversation as the excruciating pain beating against my skull came and went in waves. Sally had the brilliant idea of arranging 3 tents together so their openings faced together at right angles, in a sort of U shape, so we could sleep as close as possible, and also limit the entrance to our tents. Dave was about to go to help as they worked outside, but I clutched his hand and asked him to stay with me. The tents took some time to arrange. I started to feel a bit better once everyone got settled into their tents. A quick head count confirmed there were 5 of us. Eric would have to sleep in his tent alone, but he was more comfortable with it since all the tents were very close now. Looking back now, I think he was just trying to put a brave face on for us. I regret that moment deeply, letting him sleep in his tent alone. He was always less integrated in our group and knew that none of us would pair with him. Just before going to bed, we all agreed to leave as soon as the sun rose in the morning. I remember taking one last look outside the tent into the forest before trying to fall asleep. The wind had picked up, and the tree branches were swaying gently. Beyond our clearing was just pure darkness. It felt like the trees were closing in on me. With the faint moonlight illuminating our clearing, I turned my head to look over at the 2 tents we had left out and saw someone standing next to them. Despite the circumstances, sleep came quickly and easily. Ava's shrill scream woke me up in the middle of the night. Dave and I ripped our tent door open to find Sally and Ava looking into Eric's tent. We pushed them aside. Eric's sleeping bag was rolled up. He was still inside it. His head in the center, face contorted in utter agony. The rest of his body rolled around it with the blue fabric now dripping with dark blood. Dave zipped up the door of the tent. Ava was in shock. Her eyes had become glassy and unfocused. Sally was shaking her repeatedly, tears streaming down her face. Dave picked up his torch and yelled at us to get up and run. We left the campsite behind and entered the trail we had come from. The 5 of us huddled together, Dave leading in the front as he cast his weak flashlight over the path so we could see it. All we had to help us get through this 2-hour trail was a small white circle of light. Even the moon failed to illuminate our surroundings through the dense foliage. Ava tripped and fell, twisting her ankle. We came to a stop. Someone said they knew how to splint it so we could keep going. They dragged her into the woods instead. It happened too quickly for any of us to process. Sally was about to run after Ava when Dave held her back. She struggled and managed to free herself, running into the trees to follow the echoes of Ava's screams. I was about to run after her, but Dave held me by the shoulders and shook me hard. "We need to get out of here, Jenny, please," he said. I hesitated but jolted into motion again when Sally's voice was cut off abruptly. She had been calling out Ava's name as she ran after her. Dave and I continued to run down the trail, trying to get to our car so we could get out of here. There was nothing we could do. At some point, there were 3 of us running on the trail, Dave and I shoulder to shoulder while someone followed us closely behind. "Dave, who's behind us?" I gasped. My heart was threatening to burst through my ribcage and my legs burned. He turned to look at me. Confusion transformed into fear on his face, and then into rage. "You keep running," he told me as he produced a pocket knife from his pants. He handed me the car keys, which I nearly dropped. Then he turned around suddenly and jumped at whoever was behind us. I continued to run in fear as the sounds of a struggle grew behind me. I tripped and tumbled through the trail for what felt like hours. I didn't allow myself to stop. I almost cried when the trail ended and I walked out into the familiar car park. Not wasting a second, I ran to the car and started it up, accelerating out of that forest and onto the highway within mere seconds. I'm typing this post out at a rest stop. My phone has finally regained service, and I've called 911 to try and explain the situation. I don't think they believe my version of events, but they sent a car my way regardless. As I wait, the sun is finally starting to rise. After I hit the post button on this, I'm going to check why the person in my back seat has been so silent the whole time. What is the scariest thing you've ever seen in your life that you can't explain? 1. I've seen some pretty wild stuff in my life, but most of it is explainable. The one event that comes to mind was witnessed by my dad, brother, and myself, and it's a 2-part encounter, but I still consider it one event. This is a bit long, and I apologize, but I feel it might be worth the read. It was around 1998. My family and I had just moved into an old clapboard house on the edge of town. It had a huge backyard with a 6-foot wooden privacy fence on one side and a metal chain link fence about 4.5 feet high around the other 3 sides of the yard. Neighbors on one side, the privacy fence side, a small grass alley that ran behind the back with a street light, and then another yard, etc. Our bedroom was an old converted sunroom on the back of the house that faces the backyard. It had floor-to-ceiling windows all along the back wall looking into the backyard. We didn't have many options as to where to place our beds, so my headboard was against the windows, and my brother's bed was about 8 feet away with his headboard against the opposite wall, with the foot of the bed facing the windows. One night we were up pretty late, I was in my bed, and he was in his just talking about random things, when suddenly he got quiet. I figured he fell asleep, but then I heard him whispering in a shaky breath, so I'm like, "What?" And I hear him whisper again. So again, I'm like, "Speak up, I can't hear you." And he goes, "Don't move, and be quiet," in a forced whisper, but I, thinking he's messing with me, and like, "Bitch, why?" And I'm looking at him, and mind you, my head is to the windows, and he's pointing into the backyard behind my bed. So quickly sit up and turn around and see this huge dog head staring almost nose to glass through the window right behind my bed. I'm almost nose to nose with this thing. Just a single pane of glass and about 10 inches of empty air separate me from this thing. Now when I say I screamed, I mean I screamed. Not my proudest moment, but hey, I was like 10 years old. Well, anyways, the thing quickly ducked under the window and then ran to the side of the yard and jumped the 4.5 feet chain link fence and bolted off into the darkness. My dad came running into the room with our mom right on his heels. We were able to get out that something was looking through our window, so Dad ran back to his room and grabbed his shotgun, and then headed out the side door of the house and into the backyard. Unfortunately, or fortunately, IDK, he didn't find anything, wrote it off as I had a nightmare, and my brother wouldn't admit to seeing anything, so I took the blame and was told to quit messing around, go back to bed, typical parent response, etc. Well, later that night, maybe an hour or so, after I begged my parents to let me sleep in the living room, because leaving the house wasn't an option, and still being refused, I was made to sleep in my room. So again, my brother and I are in our room with these floor-to-ceiling windows. We are just completely rattled. We are both huddled in his bed, staring out the windows, when we see this thing come walking along the chain link fence on all fours, and the fence only comes up to its mid-shoulder, so this thing is huge. It sniffs the ground, does a few circles, and then hops the fence into the backyard like it's nothing. It walks over to the window and again gets nose to the glass like it's trying to see in. We are panicking the whole time. Well, my brother is like, fuck this. And soon as he steps off the bed, we hear this loud bang, and there is a flash of light. The thing at the windows gets knocked sideways, and without even missing a beat, it turns and runs across the full length of backyard, jumps the back chain link fence. It cleared the fence, the alleyway, and then landed in the back neighbor's yard. This is easily a 15 to 20 foot jump minimum, clearing their fence like it was nothing, and was gone at a dead run, up beside that house and off into the darkness on the other side. My dad comes tearing around the side of the house with his shotgun in hand and makes a mad dash for the side door and slams it shut behind him. He is screaming and hollering, "We gotta go," we pack up and head to a hotel that night. My mom absolutely refused to believe we saw what we said we saw, and we only lived there for about 6 months. It rattled my dad so much he didn't even want to come back. He told my mom that we were just gonna move that next day, but she wouldn't allow it. After about 6 months, she conceded, and we moved. Mind you, this is in the coastal plains region of Texas. We have no large wild canines here. We have stray dogs and coyotes, but nothing that would even remotely touch on how big this thing was. My dad swears he shot that thing with a slug from about 15 feet away with his 12-gauge shotgun right underneath its left arm, hitting it in the ribs, where its vital organs are, and nothing, it just ran off. He said the thing that freaked him out the most was that when he saw the thing jump the fence, it walked towards our window, crouched but still on its hind legs. It wasn't walking on all fours, and then when it got to our window, it stood up straighter, and he could tell that while it looked like a dog, its body was shaped wrong. He said it looked like a really stocky person wearing a dog suit, but he could tell it wasn't a suit. Also that when it was walking in circles sniffing the ground before coming into our yard the second time, it wasn't actually sniffing the ground like for a scent. It was staring at our window with its face to the ground like it was acting like it was sniffing the ground, almost as if it was playing a part to see if anyone would notice it. He said he's had dogs his whole life, and everything about what it was doing was wrong. A while later, I asked my dad why he was in the backyard if he thought I was having a nightmare, and he told me my brother is the one that gave it away. He said with how panicked I looked, that my brother was almost white as a sheet and wouldn't take his eyes off the window. He said, "Your brother has never looked so scared, and never been one with just making stuff up." So after going back to his room with my mom as he was laying there thinking about it, he decided that if my brother was as white as he was, then we had to have seen something. So he grabbed his gun in case he had to scare some creeper out of our yard, and figured he was going to go through the garage and out by the far side of the house and sneak to the corner to see if someone was peeking in our windows, or if someone was actually messing with us. He never actually thought we saw a huge dog-looking thing, just that maybe with it being dark outside and us being kids with overactive imaginations, maybe we just mistook someone as something. But when he saw that thing come up the side fence and with the street light in the back alley lighting up the backyard, he saw it and it freaked him out. He was going to creep back inside until it went up to our window, and he said as it stood up, he just got this instant feeling of just dread, like something was going to happen to us. 2. When I was a child, both my parents went to work early, so they would drop me off at my grandmother's to eat breakfast and go to school from there. My grandmother died my junior year in high school, and I started coming straight home from school. During this time, my mother started complaining that when she get home from work, the receiver of the phone, an 80s style corded push-button phone, next to her bed was left off the base. I wasn't using the phone, but she would insist I must have, because the phone was hung up properly when she left for work. One day, I got home a little early. Now, I need to pause and tell you about the layout of our apartment. From the front door, I looked directly into the living room, dining room, the door to the kitchen, and the short halfway that led to my parents' bedroom and my bedroom. There was no other door. The windows were old-fashioned narrow casement windows with screens, and we were on the 3rd floor. Anyway, as soon as I walked in the door, I clearly heard 2 footsteps in my parents' bedroom. I dropped my school bag and foolishly ran to the bedroom. It wasn't far, and took only a few seconds. I got to the bedroom and no one was there. However, I immediately noticed that the receiver of the phone on my mother's bedside table was on the floor. It was placed so that the cord to the base was stretched out as far as it could go. I later tried to replicate the placement by shaking the table, tipping the phone, etc. I could never get the receiver off the base. When I finally resorted to knocking it off with a finger, it would fall on the table or next to it. The only way I could replicate the placement of the receiver where I found it was to carefully stretch the cord, place it, and hold it for a few moments. It could not have gotten to that spot by accident. When I found the phone, I hung it up, and it immediately rang. I answered it, and it was my dad. He asked what was wrong. I asked him why he asked. He said he had called, apparently just before I got home, and someone, he thought it was me, answered the phone but never said anything. He finally hung up and had been trying to call back, and only got through after I hung up the phone. I've never figured out what happened. I definitely heard footsteps, and I'm just as certain there was no one there. No one went by me. The windows in the bedroom were not disturbed, and my parents had too much stuff under the bed and in the closet for anyone bigger than an infant to hide in either spot. Also, after this, my mother never found the phone disturbed again. 3. I've shared this story on Reddit before, and I've been thinking about it a lot lately. It's not exactly a scary thing I saw, but I still wonder about it all the time, so I'll copy and paste here. My best friend and I would always talk about crazy dreams we had. Never thought much of it, until he told me about one where he got hit by a car and died. We were about 15 to 16 when he told me about the dream. We were into conspiracies, stuff like aliens, paranormal, lucid dreaming, so we'd talk about stuff like that a lot. And he died right before he would have turned 20. He said he was riding a skateboard wearing all black when the car hit him and could see everyone at his funeral. He even said his crush was at his funeral and laughed about it. He just kept going on about how it was so real. And it really shook me up until eventually I forgot about it. Then a few years later, after I'd long forgot about the dream he told me about, it happened for real. His crush was at his funeral. He did get hit by a car and die. He was wearing all black like in the dream, his work clothes, and he was riding my skateboard. It was all true. I still don't know what to make of it all. Every single detail I remember from his dream came true, and I'm sure there's parts of it he told me that I don't remember. I felt crazy, I didn't tell anyone about. I just don't know why or how he saw it happen in his dream and think, what if he never told me about it? It just left me with so many questions, but I guess now I have proof, at least to myself, that our souls go on after we die. I just wish I knew why he experienced that dream and told me about it, like there had to be some kind of reason. I just think about how I wouldn't believe this story if I hadn't experienced it for myself. Has anyone ever experienced anything similar? 4. My very first job was as a radio DJ at a small hometown radio station in the mid-1990s. This was a tiny building out in the middle of a field with a 500 FT antenna out back and a single road from the main road to the front door. The transmitter was right behind my studio, behind sound dampening glass, and had a light bulb that was always on. The station was so small that you could see the light bulb in the transmitter room all the way from the driveway/roadway. There were only 2 doors, the front door and the back door in the transmitter room. That door didn't even have a handle on the outside, and it was always locked from the inside. It's impossible to enter that door from the outside. I worked the evening shift, from 5 p.m. to 10 p.m. After my shift, we actually went off the air for the night. I was always the last person there, so after I went off the air, I had to pull commercials for the first hour or 2 of the morning show, clean dishes, finish up some production work, etc. After working there for a year or so, I had racked up a couple of weird experiences. Shadows scurrying about at the corner of my vision, lights turning off and on. One evening, after getting in and taking over the board, I was just sitting there preparing myself mentally for the next 5 hours. I looked up, out the studio doors towards the front door, and I saw the perfect shadow shape of a man who was probably 6 feet tall. It was there. Then not. I went to my boss, who was not a nice person on her nicest days, and said, "So, I have a weird question." She sighed and looked at me, expecting who knows what. "Have you ever felt like someone was here who wasn't?" My boss yelled across the building for someone to come into her office. When that person arrived, she tilted her head at me. "He's seen Jimmy." Supposedly, everyone had seen Jimmy, the original owner of the radio station. He popped in from time to time. He won't hurt you. He's just checking in on the station. So from then on, Jimmy would make his appearances. His was a harmless presence. My studio faced another unused studio, and he would flash the lights on and off a few times. I'd say, "Hi, Jimmy. Everything's going well." And it would stop. He turned a water faucet on once. He whispered my name in my ear one night, which freaked me out. At least I think it was him. You see, there was another malevolent being that also lived there at the station. It didn't have a name, and it was about shin high. This one always gave me a really bad feeling. It was the one who would dart beside me, its shadow just in the corner of my eye. I always knew it was there, just because I would feel downright freaked out. One night in particular was the scariest I've ever been. Here it is, 30-ish or so years later, and I still can't explain it. As soon as everyone left the building for the night, I got that feeling like it was there. I just turned on all the lights, turned the music up, and tried to ignore it. The longer the night went on, though, the worse it got. Lights were flashing everywhere. A dot matrix printer in the sales office started going on its own. Something that never happened. And that office was locked. Then, ceiling tiles starting moving up as if someone hit them with a broom handle. They started closest to me from my studio, down the hall, and ended at the front door, which was locked. Then, the front door opened. A locked fucking door opened. I went down the hall to close and relock it. When I did, I saw through the door window that there was a coffee cup and a cigar on the front stoop. There was no reason for them to be there. On my way back to the studio, I got a big burst of cigar smell, like an invisible smoke cloud, right in my face. I knew my usual duties were required, but I didn't care at this point. I went off the air, grabbed my keys, and noped right the fuck out of there. I ran to my car, backed up, and looked through the front door. A figure was standing inside, silhouetted in front of the transmitter light. I peeled out and went straight home. Now, all of that is screwy, but it's not the most unexplainable thing. Is it 100% impossible someone didn't somehow sneak in and play a very elaborate prank on me? No. There's a slight, minuscule chance someone did. But to this day, I don't know how. It was an old, tiny building, but I still hold the possibility that it could have been a prank. I got home and told my mom this whole story. My heart was still pounding. She was all, "Shooey, well, it's bedtime." So I go to my bedroom and dial up a BBS to write someone what had happened to me. As I was typing up the story, my modem speaker turned on. If you are old enough to remember dial-up modems, you know the speaker doesn't just turn on once the connection is made. They wouldn't even turn back on if someone in the house picked up the phone. You'd just get a lot of bad data on the screen and your modem would disconnect. The speaker turns on, and a voice comes from the speaker, mixed with the static of the data connection. It screeched, "Help me!" The speaker then turned off, and nothing else changed on my screen. That speaker turning on and the voice coming out is solidified in my brain. I remember the screech like it was yesterday. I have no explanation for it. My mom was the only other person in the house, and she wouldn't have done something like that. She couldn't have done something like that. It was the scariest night of my life. I am as skeptical as you can be about anything ghost or UFO related, but that night is beyond my ability to explain. As kind of a footnote to all of this, I go back to that station every now and then when I go home to visit. I still know some people who work there. Jimmy is still active and is well known by the staff. The little scary one, no one else has reported seeing him. 5. When I was 9 years old, I was biking home in the evening. We lived in the countryside, up a small mountain. The road from the village was an uphill, a flat section, and then another uphill. The road lights only stretched to the end of the flat section. I was a bit afraid of the dark, so I stopped at the end of the road lights just at the bottom of the last uphill to gather courage to bike the last section home. It was a partial moon, so it wasn't pitch black, and at the end of the uphill I saw a figure walking down towards me. I thought I'd wait until he/she got closer, as I would feel less afraid to bike in the dark if there was someone else close. But about halfway down the hill, the person walked into a thin shadow of a tree on the road and never came back out. Just disappeared. I stood there for a while trying to figure out what I just saw, and then panicked and biked down to the village and stayed there until my parents came driving and wondered why I never came home. They tried to explain it with stuff like the person might have gone into the woods or something. What they didn't disclose, though, out of fear that I'd never dare to bike home again, was that my father had seen the same thing walking home from work. He had seen her clear as day, walking down the hill for a while. When he looked down for just a second and looked up, she was gone, and there were no footsteps in the fresh snow. I later read a book about local legends, and apparently a lot of people during at least a century have seen her walking down the hill and disappearing halfway down. My youngest daughter loved this story, so we've been on ghost stakeouts, where we buy pizzas and snacks and hang out at the bottom of the hill listening to the Ghostbusters theme song and try to see the ghost. 6. So in college I studied in the UK. I lived in a house with a group of other American students that had stories of the ghost of a girl who passed away while living there. I never believed in any of it, but it was fun to play along. The kitchen had one way in and out, and right after you entered the kitchen to your right was a padlocked door to the cellar where she allegedly lived. I had the only key. We were all a little homesick near Thanksgiving, so decided to do a meal together. This required some creative cooking schedules due to small appliances in the kitchen, so one girl who didn't have class the next day offered to stay up late to get the turkey going. We went into the cellar, the first and only time that evening to get larger cooking implements. At 2:04 in the morning, I wake up to my door rattling, like someone was pushing against it. I assumed it was a housemate who just went to the wrong door. About 30 seconds later, when I hear a scratchy female voice softly saying, "Hello?" every 5 seconds or so. My window was open, and it sounded like it was coming from outside, so I get up to close my window, as I assume it's some drunk girl walking back from the pub. I get to the window, and there's no one there. And then I hear, "Hello?" Clear as a bell behind me, my door rattles again and goes silent. I've had night terrors before, and hallucinate when I have even a mild fever, so I assume I'm still asleep and lay back down. The next morning at 7 a.m., the girl who's cooking tells me, "I had the creepiest night. At 1:50 I heard footsteps coming up the cellar stairs. Then the door rattled. Then at 2:10 the door rattled again, and I heard footsteps coming down." She told me this before I had said anything to anyone about what I'd experienced. 7. At one of my previous sysadmin jobs, we were closing down one of our smaller data centers as it was being consolidated into one of our larger ones, but we still had to have at least one person there in case of server issues that had to be dealt with on site. We rotated each week on which one of us would do the overnights there. The place was reportedly haunted, by what I have no idea, just heard rumors from other coworkers when I hired in. So imagine a relatively large open office space that is completely void of all the cubicles, desks, etc. that are normally there, with just one desk and a few random cables hanging from the ceiling. Also, just the lights over my desk were working and bleeding out into my surroundings by about 3 feet. That was where I was for the week, lol. I remember sitting there and just hearing ambient noise from the sorta far-off server room, fans, cooling system, etc., working on a server for a customer of ours, and seeing something dart across the room in my peripheral vision. I looked up and didn't see anything, so figured my eyes were just tired from the screen light and making me see like those floaties when your eyes close too tightly. Went back to work, and then about 5 minutes later I saw it again, although this time I heard the bathroom door open and shut. Big ass heavy door you pulled open, and the mechanism at top of door pulled it shut. Thought maybe one of my coworkers was here for a server fix, so got up and went to greet them and wait for them. About 10 minutes pass, and no one comes out of the bathroom. I go in to make sure they're not passed out or hurt. One of my coworkers suffered from seizures. But lo and behold, empty bathroom. Now I'm creeped out. Leave the bathroom, and this time see the shadow person thing on the other side of the room dart across again, but looking at it straight on and not from my peripheral vision. Quickly went over and threw the rest of the lights on and started searching the whole office and server room for a coworker, as I was 100% sure they were fucking with me. Never found anyone. Rest of the night was uneventful, as well as the rest of the week, minus me basically shitting bricks sitting at my desk waiting for something else to happen. 8. This isn't my story, it's my uncle's. A bit of backstory. He used to work on the London Underground, doing maintenance to the tracks/tunnels, etc. Once he went into a tunnel with 2 other colleagues. They'd stopped to do something, and this man said to my uncle, like, "Hey, uncle's name, can you show me the way out?" My uncle, thinking it was one of his guys, said, "You know the way out." I think he was so engrossed in his work that he didn't turn around to see this bloke to start with. So this guy says, "I'm so cold." Then my uncle said he immediately felt dead cold, and the air around him dropped. Not sure what he meant by that. So my uncle turns round and shines a light on him. My uncle said to me this bloke is what he would call a ghost. Standing there, he was holding a really old/vintage lamp and wearing a really old dirty uniform. He said the feeling he got was so strange, as if he knew this bloke was a ghost. The bloke just kept saying over and over again, "I'm so cold, I'm so cold." My uncle eventually said to this guy, "I don't think you're supposed to be here, mate. Can you see a light anywhere?" And he looked dead at my uncle and said, "Can you help me? I'm so cold." I'm unsure if the colleagues came to see who my uncle was talking to, but one of them tried to approach this bloke thinking it was someone in their team playing a joke, and this bloke just disappeared right in front of their eyes. All of them freaked out and ran. They refused to go back into the tunnel. My uncle and 2 colleagues refused to go down that tunnel again. Some other colleagues have said they've seen this bloke, and he always says how cold he is. My uncle's retired now, but says he thinks of this bloke from time to time. 9. Once when I was around 12, I was riding my bike on the trails near a golf course. There's high-tension power lines going through the park, so a clearing runs through the forest. A car pulled through the clearing, and I noticed the back seat is full, but only the driver up front. They stop, everyone gets out, and they drag a guy screaming out of the back seat, beat him up a bit, and shot him twice. Once in the gut, for pain and suffering, I suppose, and once in the head. They stuff the dead guy back in the back seat, everyone piles back into the car just as before, and off they go. I stayed hidden in the brush, dumbfounded and scared to death, until they were out of sight. I go over to where the car had been. No mess at all, just tire tracks and footprints, like it hadn't actually happened. I rode home and didn't tell anyone what I saw. After supper, everyone got into whatever they were doing. So I went to my parents' BR to use the phone. Called 911 to report it, told them I wanted to remain anonymous. They thanked me for the report, and I hung up. Never heard anything about it on the news. They must have done a good job getting rid of the body. But I still find it weird that I couldn't see any remnants of what I'd just seen right in front of my own eyes. So I've had this memory of watching a man murdered for close to 40 years now, and I think it has influenced my outlook on everything. 10. I was about 12 at the time. Every year, my parents and I would drive from Montreal to Nova Scotia to visit family. Having always gone the Trans-Canada route, we decided to go through the States for a change, so we ended up going SE through Maine, and eventually on to NB, then NS. I remember we were in a very, very remote area. Like hadn't seen a house for a long time. This was before GPS and Google Maps. So there was a growing concern in the vehicle that we might run out of gas. I don't remember the name of the road, but it was a country road that had mountain on the right side, went straight up through dense bush, and on the left it was dense bush owl, and a steep downhill where I could make out a river at the bottom of the cliff, about a 75 to 100 down the hill. Trees hung over the road, so despite it being a sunny day, the road was shady, with the exception of places where the sun would break through. I heard my dad up front ask Mom, "What the fuck is that up ahead?" As I leaned over to look up down the road, we could all see what looked like a man off in the distance on the side of the road. Too far to see color or anything, just a big dark shape standing there. As we rolled on down the road, this dude or whatever it was crossed the road. Both lanes in, I shot you not 3 to 4 steps. Once on the other side of the roads, just vanished into the woods. As we got to the spot where he had crossed, Dad slowed right down to look around. Nothing. Not a sight of anyone. No trail, nothing. No one knows what they saw, but 30 years later it gets brought up every couple of years, and the feelings are mutual. Fucking weird and creepy. 11. Was looking out my bedroom window late one summer night at stars. I noticed an oddly colored flashing star that was 100% moving. If you've ever seen a ping pong ball held up suspended by an airflow, that was the type of movement. I'd say bubbling is good description. This had me weirded out, so I pull out my phone and start recording it. Maybe 10 seconds later, the most terrifying thing I have ever seen happens. A fucking beam of white light, cylindrical and bright, not as much as a helicopter spot search, but a high-power flashlight, appears in my neighbor's backyard. Like a literal beam from heaven. Maybe 8 feet in diameter and from the blackness of space as far up as I could see. No source or anything visible. This light is first pointing in the center of their backyard, which is maybe 45 feet from my face. My window is on side of house at rear. Then it starts frantically moving around, as if it was searching for something. I felt this in my whole body immediately. I was like, it's looking for me. Stomach on floor. Then it moves up the side yard, towards front of house still in neighbor property, but now only 20 feet from where I'm standing. It then diverted onto the side of their house and scanned up the wall to a window, directly across from me 15 to 20 feet. I slammed my window down closed, shit the blackout curtains, and quickly left my room and went to a bathroom in center of house with no window visible. This was so fucking terrifying and world-changing that I can't express with words. It 100% happened, and I felt it in my bones and everything. I had this feeling that it was a warning or something, like don't film or bring attention to me/us. It had to know that it wasn't my window, and was trying to frighten me. If it detected me filming with a phone from a star that's not our sun position in the sky, far as hell, it 100% knew exactly where I was. The neighbor's window wouldn't have even had a vantage point of it, due to how it was positioned. I was viewing it 45 degrees over their 2-story house, so the neighbor in that window, direct facing my window, couldn't physically see it or where it was. That and the guy feeling I mentioned are why I feel it was warning or intentionally scaring the life out if me. It put on a "we are searching for you" show right in front of me intentionally to dissuade me from giving it focused attention. Filming. It worked too if that's the actual case. I still haven't scanned night skies since then, and that was 2 to 3 years ago, and I used to really look up at night for stuff a lot. Aside from altering my worldview/perspective completely, I knew now that something unimaginable to me exists, and it watched me watching it. It made me not afraid of night and the stuff up high, but motivated to not be doing it anymore. A surreal and insane experience. Thinking about it makes me get chills and tear up. Not sadness, but a feeling of overwhelmingness, and having a life-altering revelation. I've never told this publicly. I was feeling afraid to for a long time. Almost 3 years, and only my wife, parents, and a single friend heard this. Seeing this video made me think of it immediately. Like I was seeing something being targeted by something impossible/unknown. just like I felt. The event from first appears to it covering the neon or window, and me slamming window/curtains was maybe 7 to 9 seconds. No more than 10 and longer than 5. It's impossible to know exactly, but I'm pretty certain my range is right on it. The only other thing it could have been, still equally if not more terrifying, was an altered image of reality being uploaded to my mind. As in, I and only I would have seen this, and if anyone happened to have view of the area it happened, nothing odd would have been seen by them. IDK. Crazy shit though. I can't believe I'm actually posing it finally. 12. Back in college, me and my girlfriend would go back to her parents' old farmhouse and fool around after class. There was never anybody home. One afternoon, I'm standing in her kitchen, thirstily guzzling a post-sex Gatorade. Behind me was a back staircase leading to the second floor of the house. When I finished my drink and turned to leave the room, I noticed a little GIRL between 7 to 10 YO standing on the bottom step. My first thought was, oh crap, why didn't my girlfriend tell me there was a little girl in the house? I really hope she didn't hear what we were up to. But before I could speak, I realized something was off. She was semi-transparent and oddly two-dimensional in a way I can't articulate. Slowly, I came to the realization that I was staring at a ghost. There was nothing inherently frightening about the experience. Knowing I was in the presence of something unexplainable, I did everything in my power not to blink. I stared at her for a good 10 to 15 seconds, taking in every detail I could. She had a red and yellow summer dress on, long blonde hair that was tied into a couple of those old-timey braids at the end, black strapped shoes. Overall look gave me a 1940s to 1970s vibe. Fortunately for her, she seemed to have no idea I existed. She stood on the bottom step, looking out the back window towards the driveway like she was waiting for someone to arrive. I never took my eyes off her. Eventually she was just gone. I never believed in ghosts before that. I still don't believe in intelligent hauntings, but I'll certainly entertain the idea of residual energy and echoes of the past. 13. In 2002, I came home from college to the Cincinnati area and met up with a couple of high school friends. We were driving around in northern Kentucky around 9 p.m. It was unusually foggy that night. Low-hanging clouds, and the tops of the hills were completely hidden in the fog. I was riding in the back seat, and my two friends were in the front. Just after we crossed the bridge, I saw a light up in the fog and I assumed it was a helicopter. But that immediately made no sense since it was so foggy. Couldn't be a helicopter, there would be no visibility. I pointed it out to them, and they saw it. But because they were in the front seat, they weren't able to look out the back window, which is how I had the best view of it. I kept reporting what I saw. They eventually pulled over, and we watched for a minute, but then the light had disappeared. After waiting a couple minutes, we decided to keep moving. A few minutes later, it came back. The light was visible, and as I was watching, it was getting brighter and appeared to be getting closer to the hilltop, to the edge of the fog, and that's when it happened. I saw the edge of this round, dark thing pop out of the fog and hover there a little, almost like Jack Torrance's face sticking through the door on The Shining. I didn't see where the lights were being emitted from. They were still back far enough that they were in the cloud cover, but whatever I was looking at was a dark round surface. Obviously, my mind went straight to UFO. It's still inexplicable. I have no logical explanation for what it was or what it could be. A blimp is the best thing I could compare to, except this thing disappeared back into the clouds and the light went off. It wasn't until the last couple of years when the movie Nope came out that I kind of had a wee panic attack at the movies. The imagery used in that movie is very similar to what I saw that night. 14. About 20 years ago, as a nursing student, I was working a night shift on a very poorly staffed ward. It was sometime between 3 o'clock and 4 a.m., and I was making my rounds, checking blood pressure, pulse, and other observations. The hospital was in a fairly rural area, and through the window at the back of the ward, fields were stretching out into the distance. Some movement in the darkness caught my eye. Must be 150 meters away. I noticed what looked like a blurry figure, half ambling, half floating across the grass. It held some long walking stick, like a scythe without the blade. With each exaggerated movement, the figure seemed to shimmer, confusing me, fading. Within milliseconds, I froze in place. The hair on my arms stood up. My heart pounded with that feeling, when fear makes your blood run cold. Petrified, I called out for the only other colleague on shift. She arrived quite quickly. I just pointed, "What is that?" She pushed her glasses up the bridge of her nose. "I think it's a man," she replied. "It looks like a ghost." She squinted, looked again, and said, "No, it just looks like a man. I'd better call security." As I stood there, still in shock, the ghostly image gradually sharpened. The white, billowy form like robes turned into a patient gown, and the scythe was actually an IV pole with a bag attached. He was ambling across the grass, making exaggerated movements because the IV pole wheels don't work well on grass, and kept getting stuck in the mud. My colleague returned, confirming that security had got a report of a patient who had absconded from a ward, and we're grateful we'd been able to locate him. To this day, I can't explain how patients manage to slip away from wards in the middle of the night. Anyway, this is the story of how I discovered I was short-sighted. I booked an eye test the next week. 15. I grew up in a haunted house in Canada, from the age of 7 to 18, so I have seen and experienced a lot of incidences that I cannot and will not attempt to explain. I feel like this background will give a little context to what happened last week. The house in Canada was obviously haunted. Doors slamming, orbs, shadows, electronic phenomenon, you name it, this house had it. Whatever resided there was never malicious to any of us, maybe even playful when we were kids. But I can say that other than being a little confused, I was not afraid of it. Last week, my wife and I flew to York, UK, lovely town which is made even more special by the people who live, curate, and care for this absolute gem of a town. We spent 3 days wandering around, shopping, and drinking pints with the locals. Part of that shopping involved going into a 4-story antique store by the Minster. The first floor was really cool. Lots of housewares from a bygone era. Second floor was records. Third was curiosities gathered from a life of travel. The fourth floor was fucked up. As my wife and I rounded the banister, it felt like I walked into the saddest, angriest place I have ever been. On one wall was WW1 medals, on the other was WW2 medals, and in the middle a rocking horse. I do not know what, who, or why. All I knew is I had to run for my life. The darkness that saturated every inch of that room was indescribably terrifying. I abandoned my beautiful wife in a room with the darkest presence I have ever experienced. I sprinted from the building and sat on the front steps waiting for wife to come down and ask, "What the fuck is wrong with you?" She eventually meandered down and said, "Yeah, you felt that too, huh? The rocking horse started rocking when you ran. And this, folks, is why I will not be going back there." 16. I'm not typically one to believe in the supernatural, but something happened to me a few years ago that I still can't explain. Even thinking about it now gives me chills. And I've often wondered if someone out there might have experienced something similar. Here's my story. I was on a road trip with a couple of friends, headed to a small town known for its scenic mountains and forests. We were planning to camp out in a clearing not far off the main trail to watch the stars, and just get away from city life for a few days. Everything was going well. We reached the clearing just before dusk, set up our tents, and got a fire going. The atmosphere was just perfect, and we felt completely isolated from the rest of the world, which was exactly what we wanted. Around midnight, the conversation started winding down, and the forest was completely quiet except for the occasional crackle of our fire. We were starting to get sleepy when I suddenly heard what sounded like faint, distant music. I thought maybe I was imagining it, but I noticed my friend looking around too. I asked him, "Do you hear that?" He nodded, looking just as confused as I felt. We strained our ears, trying to place the sound, and realized it was coming from deeper in the forest, beyond where our firelight could reach. It was a strange, melodic humming, almost like a lullaby. The weird part was how it seemed to echo around us, as though we were in a large, hollow room. We thought maybe some other campers had brought a radio or something, but the music didn't sound modern or even like any genre I'd ever heard. It was haunting and beautiful, yet it had this deeply unsettling quality. We debated investigating, but ultimately decided against it. It was late, we were in an unfamiliar forest, and we didn't have a strong enough light to make it far. So we sat there, listening to the eerie music, hoping it would stop. But it didn't. It kept going, growing louder, almost like it was getting closer, but we still couldn't see anything beyond the firelight. Then something really bizarre happened. All at once, the fire suddenly dimmed, and the whole clearing felt cold, like someone had sucked all the warmth out of the air. The music was clearer now, and it was almost as if it was coming from all directions. My friend whispered, "I think we should go back to the car." He didn't have to tell me twice. We quickly grabbed our essentials, left the rest, and started moving back toward the trail. As we hurried through the dark, the music seemed to follow us, fading and growing louder in waves, almost like something was pacing us from a distance. At one point, I thought I saw a flicker of movement in the trees, a shadow that didn't quite match any of the natural shapes. We finally made it back to the car, locked ourselves in, and drove back to the nearest town without looking back. When we went back the next morning to grab the rest of our gear, everything was exactly as we'd left it, but the clearing felt different somehow, like something had been disturbed. Even in broad daylight, I felt like we weren't alone. To this day, I can't explain what we heard that night. We've tried rationalizing it as maybe a strange echo or another group of campers playing music, but no one in town had seen or heard anything unusual that night, and the nearest campsite was miles away. I've since talked to other people who enjoy camping or hiking in remote places, and while some have strange stories, no one's described anything quite like this. Part of me wonders if it was just some shared hallucination or a trick of the mind, but we all heard it, and we all felt the cold, hollow feeling in the clearing. I still don't know what to make of it. 17. When I was a kid, maybe 10/11ths, my family was visiting my grandparents in the mountains in Colorado. I woke up in the middle of the night to my bedroom door slowly opening and subsequently a cold wind blowing at me. A wolf figure slowly came around the corner, but it had a kind of purple glow to it. Once I made eye contact, I couldn't break it. In my mind, I felt that it was asking me to follow. So I got out of bed and slowly walked toward the door. The wolf turned around and started walking down the hallway. When I got to the door, it was gone. I suddenly felt extremely scared and ran back to bed and hid under the covers. Fast forward about 8 years. I was back visiting my grandparents with my cousin. We were working at a local hotel, breaking ice off the sidewalks for 8 hours a day. One night, we decided to take a walk, and about a quarter mile from the house, a wolf was standing in the middle of the road. We were 30 yards away when we saw it and froze. Mind you, wolves hadn't been in Colorado for decades at this time. It was alone. We slowly started walking back to the house, and it started to walk as well, keeping its distance and its pace. We sped up, it sped up. We started running, it started a gallop. We got back to the house, ran inside, and slammed the door behind us. We went upstairs to look out the window, and the wolf was just sitting at the end of the driveway, staring at our window 18. My mom and I were driving up from Texas to Washington in late October. We stopped to rest in this national park in southern Colorado, and we're pretty much the only people there. It was usually daylight when we stopped to rest, because my mom preferred driving at night. We were sitting there making something to eat when this guy on a bicycle went past us and just glared at us with these hate-filled eyes. My mom and I were pretty creeped out by him, but went on about our business and then laid down in the car to sleep. Her up front and my boxer and I in the back seat. I got this feeling like I was being watched, and then my dog's hackles went up, and she started this really deep down kind of growl. She only ever made that growl when she was really bothered by something. I reached over and chambered around in my shotgun, and my mom heard me and said, "Hey, are you awake? Do you want to get out of here?" And I said, "Hell yeah, I do." We got up and I stood guard with my shotgun and the dog when she packed everything into the car, and we left. We couldn't see him, but we could both feel him watch us. And the dog didn't settle down again until we'd left that place far behind. We made a beeline for Moab and stopped at this truck stop to rest instead. When we got up, we went in and got something to eat and met this really friendly trucker and told him what happened. He shadowed us north for quite a ways and then handed us off to other truckers. They shadowed us all the way to Idaho. They were all a great bunch of guys for sure. 19. Emma, start this by saying I'm on the fence about paranormal stuff. Like, I'd like to think there's something there, but I will also go through every single logical explanation I can first. Do my best to put stuff down to normal incidents, you know? Anyway, my old family home was a little off, like. It generally had a heavy air about it, and no matter how homely we tried to make it feel, you always felt at least a little unwelcome. We lived there 12 years, and it never felt like home. It was a pretty old house. 2,100-plus-year-old terraced houses knocked together in West Yorkshire, UK. Creepy arse coal cellar included. Although for some crazy reason, we only had access to one half. The other half was walled off with a single brick knocked out for ventilation. On a night, I'd be laid up all night listening to the sound of a person walking up and down the landing. Wasn't my parents, as I knew their footsteps, and wasn't my younger sisters, as the footsteps were too heavy. They'd move along the landing, from the top of the stairs, stopping outside my room. Then walk back to the landing. Used to creep me the fuck out, as I could never see a shadow of anyone stood outside my door either. You'd hear voices and bangs in the other rooms of the house when no one else was in. Not the neighbors moving around or sounds of the house settling either. The scariest thing that ever happened was one night, not long after we got our first family dog. I'm sat in the living room with my dad watching TV. Now the two houses knocked together part is important here. Because of this, one half of the lower floor was the living room. The other half was the kitchen/dining area. There were entrance doors for both halves by the front and back doors, so you could walk a full circle round the downstairs going past both external doors. We were just chilling out. The dog was vibing sprawled by the radiator under the front window. All of a sudden, we hear an almighty bang, the sound of the back door slamming shut and rattling. Because of the location of the door, we even felt the vibration. A couple of seconds later, our dog goes ballistic barking at the hallway. I go to see what's going on, and the front door is wide open. There's nobody out on the street that could have opened the door and nowhere someone could have run to hide without us seeing/hearing them. Go to check the back door and it's all locked up with the chain on and everything. Creeped me out for a good while, and I refused to be home alone for a couple weeks after. 20. Most of the really scary things in my life have gotten explanations eventually. The one that remains very scary even after learning what was going on was a hike I took. My husband and I took our baby to his parents to meet them. It was calving season, so they couldn't leave the ranch, and we didn't want them to miss out on the newborn phase for our baby. Once there, my husband gets to work helping on the ranch. I was still recovering from a difficult labor, third-degree tears, etc., so I was absolutely not allowed to help pull calves or haul hay bales. So I decided to use our baby carrier and take some slow walks through the canyons around the ranch. It's a beautiful area. For the first time out there, I saw butterflies. Not just one or two, but a whole little cloud of them. I followed them to a little dry canyon where I could see a stream a little ways beyond. There were 4 or 5 different types of butterflies, and just dozens and dozens of each type. When the wind shifted, I smelled intestines. Looking around, I realized there were a lot of dead things nearby, in various states of skeletal remains. At least 1 cow, an elk, and a mule deer. A few bones that looked like coyotes. Lots that were just old and scattered. But there was one that looked like it was recent. Really recent, just laying under an overhang. That was the one I'd smelled when the breeze shifted. I had passed it on my way into the canyon without seeing under the butterflies and had to pass it again to leave. Later, my father-in-law would explain that butterflies in the desert will drink sweat and tears from mammals to survive. And if there is blood around, they will drink that for the salt. Also, cougars/mountain lions like to find canyons or dry washes that lead to streams, as those tend to funnel wildlife through narrowed paths. The mountain lion perches above on a rock or tree branch and waits to drop down on the animals passing beneath. They will hunt along wildlife corridors and overpasses for the same reasons. This method allows the mountain lion to take down animals larger than itself, like elk or cattle. There wasn't hardly any meat missing from that deer, maybe a pound or 2. I'd interrupted the lion's meal when I walked into its funnel. That particular cat was well known to the ranch. He was about 15 years old at that point, and had been hunting closer and closer to the barns that year, to the point he'd been seen in between the house and the barn, and some of the barn cats had gone missing. Cougars get desperate for easier prey as they age, and it's uncommon for them to live as long as that one did. He finally passed at around 16 or 17 years old.
Stalked by a female solo camper for several days while on our mountain camping honeymoon. It was the summer of 2016 and I had just married my longtime girlfriend. Over the course of our 12-year relationship, we had traveled to the mountains several times in both summer and winter for camping, but also to stay in nice mountain hotels and snowboard the slopes. Naturally, we both agreed this was how we wanted to spend the first few weeks of our marriage. We booked a 20-day stay at a mountainside campground on the other side of the country. We also decided to bring our dogs with us, as they too love being outdoors, and we generally bring them camping anyway. After 2 days of road tripping, we had arrived, quickly set up, and settled in for a good long stay on the mountain. It was beautiful. A couple of days into our trip, and we had already met a bunch of fellow campers. We are very experienced campers, so we generally attract a lot of attention from novice campers asking for tools or supplies. As they see, we are well set up. We are usually more than happy to help people get situated if they need matches, cream or sugar, or help setting up their equipment. It was day 4 or 5 when she first made her presence known to us. I will refer to this person as she or her, as we never learned her name. We were sitting down under the shade of the large pine tree at the edge of our site, drinking beers and playing cards, when she seemingly appeared out of nowhere. She was just suddenly right there. "Can I pet your dog?" she said. Even my dogs didn't see her approach, as the very sound of her voice triggered them into a startled frenzy. As the dogs were worked up already, I politely told her no. Then she just stood there, at the edge of our site. Didn't say a word. Just stood there, sort of existing but not really doing anything. She wasn't exactly staring at us or looking at anything in particular. I asked her if she needed anything and she said no. After a few minutes she walked off. I work with people with brain injuries, so I've had my fair share of experiences with unusual behaviors, including people with poor social skills. So I wasn't about to write this person off as creepy just yet. but she had my attention. I casually watched her walk off and enter a campsite across the path and a few sites down from ours. There was already a small tent set up in the site, but she proceeded to pull an even smaller single-person tent from her backpack and began setting it up. The day prior, we saw 2 young girls set up the other tent and were clearly the occupants of the site. There was no further interaction with her that day, although we did notice that the owners of the other tent on the site were not around at all that day, and we didn't see them return that night. Well, the next morning I am walking to the camp showers to clean up for the day. As I walk past her site, I see she is sitting in her little tent reading a book. The door to the tent is open. I pay no attention and keep on my way to take my shower. When I'm done my shower and walking back, I notice her tent is now closed, but it's jiggling about, so I know someone is in there. Then she made her presence known in a big way. Just as I am approaching her site on the way to mine, she unzips her tent, and I immediately see that she is completely nude. She then positions herself just inside the tent at the door and lets out this over-the-top full body stretch and held her arms way up the sky while pushing her chest forward like it was some kind of mating ritual designed just for me. While she does this, she lets out what I only describe as an exotic moan. It was pretty obvious she was putting on a show for me. I continue on my way to my site and tell my wife about the display I had just been witness to. We both laughed it off and moved on with our plans to hike a good trail to a waterfall. The trailhead for this hike was accessible from the campground, so we didn't have to drive to get there. We just walked the additional 2 kilometers to the trail. We walked at a good pace, so when we got to the trail we decided to stop for a few minutes and take some photos of the surrounding mountains before heading into the thicker bush. After sitting there for maybe 5 minutes while my wife is taking pictures, she emerges from the trail that leads towards the campground. At first I thought, okay, coincidence. She's staying here and this is a pretty common trail. But then she sees that I see her, and she stops dead in her tracks and just stands there. Same demeanor as our first encounter. Just standing, not doing anything in particular, but also sending creep vibes our way. This was the first time I said to my wife, I think we have a stalker. Confused, my wife then looks to where I'm looking and is immediately a little creeped out. Once again I think, whatever, maybe she's just hiking the trail, no big deal. So we continue on the trail at a good pace, and she maintains a consistent distance behind us. Our dogs at this point are a little distracted by her, and our youngest dog keeps turning around to watch her. I got a little fed up with the dog constantly stopping to look back, so I decided we will stop for some water and let this woman pass. Well, what does she do but fucking stop walking when we stop, and once again just stands there. Okay, so now we are genuinely concerned because this is approaching horror/suspense movie creep level, and I start to wonder what this girl's intentions are. Standing motionless at that distance and refusing to pass us just ramped up the oh shit factor to about 9. So my wife and I agree to just give her and cut the hike short by taking the shorter loop, which was only another half kilometer ahead, and head back to our camp. We managed to get some distance between us by jogging every time we would make a turn, and she was out of sight. We didn't see her again until later that night. That night my wife decided to take an evening shower at the camp showers. When she returned to our camp, she tells me our stalker was in the bathrooms, also taking a shower. This time, however, she was with 2 other girls and appeared to be getting ready for a night at the club. There is a nearby ski town that has a few nightclubs and bars, so it was reasonable to see the girls getting ready for a night out. The 2 girls she was with were the 2 we saw previously set up at her site. My wife explains that she quickly picked up on the fact that the 2 girls and our stalker friend were not well known to each other. It was clear that the 2 girls were close friends with plans to go out partying, and our stalker was making an attempt to be friends and sort of invited herself to join them in their night out. Now we know the ski town well, and the girls kept reinforcing that they were meeting at a specific restaurant before going to the bar. It was currently 10:30 p.m., and we know the restaurant they were telling her to go to was closed at 10 p.m. They were lying to her about their plans. The stalker kept asking them too, "Are you sure this place? Are you sure?" They convinced her, and she then left to her tent to finish getting ready while the 2 friends stayed in the bathroom to finish their makeup. My wife went on to explain how after she left, the 2 friends were mocking and making fun of our stalker. They were young, 20-somethings, acting like little girls in elementary school. My wife has no time for that, creepy stalker or not. She had to say something to the girls for their behavior. My wife calls them out on their behavior. Well, putting all the catty bitch bullying aside, the girls explained to my wife that the stalker girl had set up her tent on their site when they were staying with a friend in the ski town. When they returned, they found her living at their site without invitation. She had just taken it upon herself to take a little corner of their site without knowing them at all. The girls said they were upset with her and trying to make her feel uncomfortable so she would leave, but she wouldn't leave. Of course, My wife asked them why they didn't just report her to the park warden. The excuse they gave was they were leaving the next day and didn't want to make a huge deal out of it. So whatever happened between them and the fake late dinner plans and clubbing is unknown to us. About 3 a.m. that same night, we are all awoken to a blood-curdling scream right outside our camper. At first I was like, holy shit, that must be a wild animal. My wife is trembling, dogs barking, and I am startled but curious. I peel back the window cover to see her, standing motionless on the path outside our trailer. I had the window cover down maybe 8 to 10 centimeters when she appears to make direct eye contact with me. My heart rate is jacked. What the actual fuck? After gazing in my general direction for what seemed like an eternity, she calmly turns around and walks to her tent. I go make sure our trailer is locked. After a good hour and a stiff whiskey, we manage to get back to sleep. So the next day is a Friday. We have friends from a nearby major city coming up the mountains to spend the weekend with us. We haven't seen them in a while, so we are excited for a couple days together. Well, they are not at our site for 15 minutes, and as they are setting up their tent, she mysteriously appears out of nowhere yet again. Like bam, there she is, but now this time she is actually in our sight. I hadn't had a chance to tell our friends about her before she arrived, so they were a little more friendly than I was. She asks me once again if she can pet my dog, who during all of this is barking at her. I think I said something like, she isn't being very friendly towards you right now, so I would prefer if you didn't. She didn't pet my dog, but she also just stood there staring at me like she was considering how she would dismember my limbs. She then notices our friend's tent brand as he is still setting it up and comments on how it's the same model as hers, although a larger sleeping capacity. My buddy has picked up on the creep vibes and my general displeasure with her presence, so just gives her the, oh yeah, cool, and keeps setting it up. Well, she starts grabbing at the tent pegs and picks up the hammer and says she will help him set it up cause she has experience with it. My buddy declines and asks for his tools back. Cue the fucking psychopath stare down, but this time she has a hammer in hand, adding to the oh shit factor. She literally just drops everything right there and runs off. I go on to explain the last few days to our friends, and they agree we need to keep an eye on her. So by this time the two girlfriends whose site she had hijacked were packed up and gone. It's now Friday night, and we've been drinking all day, so we're feeling pretty good. It's maybe about 11 p.m. when she walks over to our site again. She says, hey, you guys seem to have a lot of extra room with the tent and the camper. Do you think I could stay with you guys tonight? We could have a lot of fun in there together. My buddy is feeling pretty good from all the day beers, so he's pretty forward when he replies, did you just propose a gangbang to us? Now this whole time I'm just sitting in my camp chair with my whiskey taking this all in. She wasn't really taking notice to me at all so far. Then she smiles, turns her head, and looks directly down at me and says, I like your friend. She then turns around and walks away into the darkness of the night towards the forest. What the fuck? We are all now terrified she is going to return. I decided right then and there, if we see her again in a creepy fashion, I am calling the park warden. This is getting silly. Well, the night is winding down, so we all decide to walk together to the bathrooms to clean up for bed. My wife pulls on my hoodie and says, babe, look. I look over to see that the site she was set up on is completely destroyed. Shit everywhere. Just stuff, garbage, clothing, food, everywhere. I thought, okay, this is weird. Could this have been a bear? No, we would have heard it. I then noticed that the tent is gone. She is gone and left the site a complete mess. As luck would have it, the park patrol was completing their fire rounds and were at the messed up site when we were returning from the bathrooms. We told them there was a girl staying on her who was acting erratic, and we suspected she was squatting on the site based on our conversation with the two girls from earlier in the week. We didn't see her again for the rest of our trip until the last full day. There is a great little lookout point not far from our site, which has amazing views of the river and valley below, and it was a perfect evening to see the sunset behind the mountains. It was a lovely final send-off to an otherwise beautiful honeymoon. Just when we thought we were done with her, she emerged once again from seemingly nowhere. We were sitting on a couple chairs that are bolted in place at the viewpoint, taking pictures of the valley below. As my wife is looking through the camera viewfinder, she picks up on the woman in the distance. She is standing the Addison Woods a little ways down mountain towards the valley, watching us. As her final act, she walked up the mountainside and sat right beside us on a boulder that was beside the chairs. She says nothing, just sits there. My wife has the brilliant idea of asking me to take one last picture of the scenery, and she gives me a little wink. I pick up on her idea right away and I positioned myself so this woman is going to be in the picture. My wife wanted this lady's photo in the event something bad happens with her before we can leave the area. We took our final looks out at the beautiful scenery and headed to our camp for the night. We didn't see or hear from her again. Upon reflection, we agreed this woman had some serious mental health issues, obviously. She had zero social skills. And we did witness her attempt to make friends with those two girls that shafted her in a terrible way. That being said, she did things way beyond the realm of acceptable social awkwardness. There were moments though she would pull out a knife and kill us all where we stood. More than that, the stalking, the midnight screaming and running off into the woods at night was terrifying to us, and I feel a story worthy of this sub. I do have the photo on a thumb drive somewhere, and we'll see about uploading a pixelated photo if it's appropriate. To anyone else, the picture just looks like a person is sitting in the shot. But to us, it's a reminder of our wild adventure and start of our amazing marriage. To our honeymoon stalker, let's not meet ever again. Why I no longer go camping, and why I really love my dog. To understand my story, you sorta have to know a tiny bit about trespassing laws in our country. In that we don't have any so long as you're respectful and non-destructive. You can walk over any hills you like, and in my case, camp on any beach of your choosing so long as once you leave the area is how you found it. I used to love camping when I was little. Our family would go multiple times a year with a large group of my parents' friends and their kids. On average, there were maybe 10 of us at a time, which was a bit of a logistical challenge since we always headed out to this one really remote beach on the coast. Actually, we weren't the only ones. There are always yachts bobbing just off the shore with people in them, and other campers lining up and down the beach. Most of them also had children or teenagers, so it wasn't a wild party scene. It was very much an informal, family holiday spot. There was even a small building with toilets and showers installed nearby, even though this was the middle of nowhere. I guess the local council must have figured it out and got sick of people peeing behind bushes. We took a trip up in spring 2011. I'm really bad with time, but I know this because I got my dog in winter 2010. After picking her out that November from the shelter as a birthday gift from me to me, as I paid her adoption fee. Reddit, I know you love dogs, and she will be very important to the story later on, so let me tell you a little bit about Parmesan. Parmesan came to me as a 6-month-old puppy who had been rescued from a dogfighting situation. We're not entirely sure what breed she is exactly, but my best guess is a Lurcher/Staffy mix. She is a wonderfully well-tempered dog with people and most dogs, but you absolutely do not threaten her. She'll have you. So by the time of this camping trip, I'd had Parmesan for a few months. She'd never come camping with us before, but far as my family are concerned, dogs go on camping trips, so when we all piled into the car, she came too. Unusually though, none of the family friends could make it, so it was only me, my sister, my dad, and my mom. I didn't mind, I wasn't that attached to the other kids. I'd rather play with my dog and I'd still have my sister. The drive took the best part of 6 hours, and because we'd left a bit later, although I don't remember why we'd left later than normal, we arrived at sunset. Not a good time to be building a tent, but we'd expected to arrive to other campers already set up, and the beach illuminated in campfires. The beach was empty. In spite of this, my parents started taking stuff out and trying to build the tent. They asked us to fetch some of the lighter bags from the boot of the car while they sat pointing a flashlight at the sand to see properly. I rolled down the window of the car for Parmesan before getting out. It was pretty hot for that time of year and I wanted her to have air. Always got to be looking out for my furry little homie. As we're fumbling about in the dark, on a beach, in the middle of nowhere, it's pretty spooky. The one road that led to this beach was circular and had a bridge over the water, meaning you could basically circle around the beach like a big zero shape if you felt like it. I wasn't really paying any attention to the road. I was complaining. I was tired, as kids are wont to do, but my mom was. After maybe 15 minutes of my dad trying to nail the tent into the sand, my mom's asking him, had he seen that car drive round? It's been a few times. My dad kinda shrugged her off. He's sorta like that. I don't know if he said anything back to her, but after a few more minutes a car pulled up next to ours on the road and someone got out. It was maybe 15 or 20 feet from the cars to where we were, and the light was pretty low, except for the torches. We weren't expecting to see anyone else out here at this point, and I think my mom said, it must be the security. I don't know why a random beach would have security. I think what she meant was the Wildlife Trust or something, as they do occasionally come down to do their nosy. The guy was walking pretty unevenly. He must have been drunk or high, because he had that stagger to him. There was absolutely no way this guy was sober. Cool. A junkie. Not an unusual find, but it's rare to see them in the wild. As he walked into flashlight range, we realized he was carrying a large knife, maybe 15 inches. Although I was small at the time, so maybe my sense of scale was off. I don't like my dad, but credit to him. Once he saw this, he got up immediately, holding onto the camping mallet, and put us all behind him. The man began to shout wildly at us that we can't camp here, and he was just letting us know. My dad tried to admittedly be a bit low-key with the guy and told him that was fine, we'd leave, but this didn't work. He kept coming closer to us, so my dad started shouting and the man kept shouting back. My sister and I were crying. I remember shaking. I was utterly terrified, as I'm sure anyone would be in that situation. It really did seem like this guy and my dad were gonna fight. And I'm gonna be honest, I didn't fancy my dad's chances. While it's grim to consider, I'm absolutely convinced he would have killed my dad and possibly us as well once he was done, as I don't think my mother would have had the common sense to run with us. I love her, but she's always put dad and her relationship with him above us. This isn't how it went down. A bolt from the black like a wolf descending on its prey took us all by surprise, most of all the man with the knife. In that moment, Parmesan was the apex predator large canines represent in nature. She got him good by the arm and clamped down hard, ripping his jacket and shredding the skin underneath. He dropped the knife, as it had been in the arm she had got him by. He kicked her, he punched her, and eventually got her off. He grabbed the knife from the sand and ran back to his car and drove off. Parmesan didn't follow him. She stayed with us, muzzle covered in blood. Quickly as we could, we gathered our things and all got back in the car, all pretty shook up by the incident. I looked Parmy over. She was okay, but the car's window was much more open than I'd left it. We think what happened was, when the shouting started, she must have put her paws up on the gap I'd left for her. As it was an old car and had the rolly down windows and not an electric button, we think she must have been able to hit it with her paws to force it down enough to squeeze out. This is not the end of my story. We were all pretty scared, and since we had the dog with us, we couldn't book into a hotel for the night. My parents decided just to drive home so we could all feel safe, but first had to drive into the nearest town for petrol as they were kind of low. I spent the time trying to clean Parmesan up a little. I'd always loved dogs, but what she'd just done for me blew my mind. As we drove into town, we came across a petrol station, but it looked closed. My dad drove up closer to get a better look and stuck his head out the window to get a better look at the sign. My mom asked him what on earth he was doing, and he told her he was trying to see when it opens. Never. My heart fucking sank. Parked in the corner, behind a van so we hadn't seen him at first, was the man with the knife. He was sitting on the bonnet of his car, using some tissue paper to clean up his arm. It looked pretty bad. Without stopping to refuel or look anywhere else in town, my dad drove right out of there. He decided to go to the next town over, but this was remove. The next town over was 60 miles away. He didn't have that much petrol, we realized. As we began driving, we were going to break down. That's fine, Dad said. We had AA cover. They'd come tow us home, or at least to somewhere acceptable for the night, better than staying in the last town. After driving for maybe 5 minutes, lights flash us from behind. Another car. The same car the man had been driving. It was him, following us. He must have realized we were low on petrol. The next half hour was one of the worst half hours of my life. I had a complete and utter breakdown, as did everyone really. I could tell my parents were trying to keep it under wraps so it wouldn't upset us. But we weren't really little kids, we were both double digits. We knew how dangerous this situation was. Dad turned off the radio to conserve petrol, and the man followed us for 55 miles before he peeled away onto another road. Our fuel meter was on the big red E for empty. For the last 10 miles, we were driving on fumes. I don't really believe in God, but if he does exist, that was definitely one of his miracles. Once we got there, we drove into a petrol station and refilled to a full tank before driving the rest of the way home. Sister and I slept in the car after that. I only woke up once we made it all the way home. Just grateful nothing worse had happened than that. After getting some sleep, my mom phoned the non-emergency line for the police and reported what had happened. They never got back to her after that, but apparently the woman she spoke to said they may wish to in the future, as he matched the description given of a suspect wanted in relation to a murder charge. No idea if he actually was that guy or just a random psycho. As I said, they never got back to her. So what's the takeaway then? Other than crazy man on the beach, let's not meet. Well, for me it's that I love Parmesan. She's still with us now, old as the hills and twice as grizzled, as one of my mom's friends likes to joke. I don't know why she did what she did that day. I couldn't tell you what her thought process was. What I do know is that this poor puppy was born into an environment where they abused and neglected her, only to be rescued and taken to a shelter where her mother and siblings all found homes before her. Despite how badly people had treated her, when I took her home, she forgave but never forgot. I think the saying is, I never trust a person who doesn't like a dog, but I always trust a dog when they don't like a person. They have a very good understanding of human body language. and I think she must have understood how much danger we were in. If you're able to, please adopt. You might find yourself in a situation like mine one day. I promise you, if you're willing to save a four-legged friend's life, they will pay you back tenfold if they're able to, without a thought for their own safety. I paid £78 for Parmesan's adoption fee, which is a lot when you're a kid, but it chills me to my bones knowing if I hadn't been so instant on a dog I might be dead. Edit. My God, I was not expecting this to get this sort of reaction at all, especially not in so little time. I've spent most of my night off going through comments, clarifying stuff and replies, ECT. I'm going to answer a few frequently asked questions quickly, and then turn notifications off as I need to get on with my uni work. I live in Scotland, and this happened in the Highlands, fairly remotely. The drive took so long because we always used this one really specific beach, and the car was loaded down with camping supplies, 2 small children and a dog, so the car was heavier than normal, and pee breaks were frequent. You've all peed on the side of the motorway, don't at me. We didn't phone the police while being followed because we had no signal, or so my mom said, but I suspect the genuine reason was that there was weed in the car my parents used to smoke/deal. I didn't include this in the original story because it didn't affect my experience of this story. I was a little kid, and I was telling it from my perspective as I remember it, as per subreddit rules. Thank you all for the awards and saying so many sweet things about Parmy.